Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Thursday, August 18th. That means, Ryan, in 2 more days, we'll be 2 weeks away from the season opener against Ohio State. Got a lot to talk about today. Some not good news, some good news, some things going on well. So we're going to kind of, instead of doing what we were going to talk about yesterday, which is to discuss sort of the all-opponent team. It was meant to be a fun show. We're going to have some stuff that's going to be fun today. Obviously some good news, but obviously some things that are not good news. So we're going to start off with some recruiting discussion, and then we'll go into some team topics. And, of course, if we still have some time, depending on how all the rest of this goes, we are going to talk about the team and do a mailbag. So, Ryan, let's start off with, obviously, the big news last night was that Notre Dame's #1 commit, Keon Keeley, first commit in the class and also the highest ranked guy in the class, has decommitted from Notre Dame, and he's going to reopen his recruitment. Certainly a big, big blow for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. I mean, let's, I guess, start here, Brian, right? Like I always say, it's okay to be excited. It's also okay to be disappointed. I mean, the fandom, the fan side of me, when we heard that this was going to happen over the next, because we had heard about this a few days in advance, it is one of those situations where it's unfortunate. He's a great young man. He's a great athlete, a great football player. There's a lot that you love about a guy like a Keon Keeley. And I think that he does love the University of Notre Dame.
Right.
But we have talked a lot about this. We're not going to go fully into the backstory, but there are things around him that have caused him to reopen that recruitment. So it is what it is. It's a tough blow, but it's one that Notre Dame has to figure out, right? What's the next step moving forward?
Right. Here's what we're not going to do on this show. We're not going to be like, it's fine. No big deal. They're going to go find somebody else and it's all good and you're better off without him anyway and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that today because it is a blow. We got asked a question last night, with the presence of, who's the replacement for Keon Keeley and how do you feel about Josh Burnham and Aiden Byron? And look, there's two stories to this, right? One is there isn't a replacement for Keon Keeley. There isn't. He's my #1 ranked player in the country. So there isn't anybody in the class that you look at and say, okay, you can go get this kid, right? There isn't a Keon Keeley in the class. Keon was a program changer. I mean, everything we've said about him before today doesn't change because he's not committed to Notre Dame anymore. What changed? That's just a fact, right? And the Notre Dame stance at this point in time is they're moving on, and there's a lot of debate that can be had about that. Some people think they should still try to recruit him. I'm kind of torn. For me, it's like I don't want to go down without a fight. I want to keep recruiting him, but if you talk to, if you look at it from Notre Dame's standpoint, you kind of understand where they're coming from. Like, look, we got him on him first, got a commitment from him over a year ago. We built our entire class around him. We've made him the leader of this class. We've done all the things that we can do. Notre Dame, from what I'm told, Notre Dame told him, look, here's our policy on the whole visit thing, because this is what this all comes down to. Our policy is if you're committed to Notre Dame, you can't take official visits. If you decide to take official visits, we as a staff, looking at it from Notre Dame's standpoint, have to go out and make sure that we protect ourselves. Because if you're taking official visits, clearly there's some interest in some other schools. You're not just doing it for a joyride, okay? Right. You may say you are, but we're not going to assume that you are, and we have to go out and recruit other players. But we will still recruit you. We will still be on you. We will still do what we need to do with you. If you decommit, however, it's a sign to us that of where you are. So, so Keon can say, I love Notre Dame and all that kind of stuff is there, but what at the end of the day, what really matters are his actions, and his actions are that of someone who has decommitted from Notre Dame, knowing that would mean that Notre Dame is going to essentially stop recruiting him. And the reason they're doing it is because what else can Notre Dame do at this point in time? Right. What message can they say? What's like the magic conversation that they haven't had with him already that's going to get him to change his mind? What they have to do is they have to go out and got to move on. The other part of this is if you're going out there and trying to land another top defensive end, and there's guys on the board that, we're going to hear names like Caleb Herring and Shandavian Bradley and some of the other guys that are on your board. You're going to hear more players named. There's a couple names that we were given today that I don't think they're going to get out there. At least Notre Dame doesn't want out there because they're committed to other schools beyond the names that have already kind of gotten out there. But the reality is if you're still kind of begging Keon to come to Notre Dame, you have no chance at getting those players at this point in time. And so that's kind of where Notre Dame is like, look, if you really wanted to be with us, you'd be with us. You'd stay committed. And he chose not to stay committed. And the reason why is there's influences around him. And I'm not saying this to criticize them or rip them or whatever. It's just a reality that feel he should decommit and go through the process and make sure, he's a 5-star now and all this other kind of stuff. And when those influences are around him and kind of steering his decision-making process, that rarely ends up well for Notre Dame. And some people have talked about, for example, Stephon Tuitt. And if you remember that scenario, Ryan, so obviously Stephon Tuitt had been committed to Notre Dame for a while. He ended up taking official visits in the fall. He took an official visit to Auburn. He took an official visit to Georgia Tech, and he ends up decommitting and flipping to Georgia Tech, and it lasted like a couple days. And then he got back to Notre Dame. Well, the big difference in these two commitments are Notre Dame was in the midst of a bad season when Stephon decommitted, right? They were like 4-5, around the time he started kind of having some leanings. His head coach was pushing him to Georgia Tech, but his mom was pro Notre Dame the whole time, and she did things to try to help Notre Dame along. That's not happening here. They're not getting an opportunity here, in my opinion, to or they're not getting the support that they would need to be able to flip him back. And I think at the end of the day, that's where Notre Dame is at. Like, do I feel, based on conversations I've had, if Keon decided tomorrow or the next week or in a month or 6 months that he wanted to come back to Notre Dame, would the Notre Dame coaches welcome him back? Yeah, I think they would. Because everything that I've heard is they know that, and I think that's what hurts Notre Dame so much is they know he's such a great fit for Notre Dame. I mean, he is a Notre Dame type of kid, but at the end of the day, if he doesn't realize that, and if other things are more important to him than all the opportunities for Notre Dame, then there's nothing you can do about that. And people keep throwing around NIL, and I want to address this one. So there's two ways to look at NIL. Number one is this decision being driven by NIL? And here's what's happening. NIL is the new boogeyman. Every time you lose a kid, it's NIL. It's NIL. It's NIL. They didn't lose Jason Moore because of NIL. They just got beat, right? They lost Dante Moore because of NIL. Fact. They didn't lose Ronan Hannafin because of NIL. They just got beat. Are NIL deals being offered to Keon Keeley? I'm sure they are, just like they are to other kids, but that's never been a conversation with me when I've talked to Keon. It's never come up with me. It's never come up when I've had conversations with Notre Dame about if he's asking for NIL deals, and it's never been a conversation with his mother. And what you have to understand is it's not always about NIL deals. That doesn't mean money's not a part of it, but what programs like Alabama have mastered, and this is where I'm going off of the intel that I know, and now I'm offering my opinion. Okay, so here's my opinion. When you look at these situations, schools that know how to properly buy players know when the player can be bought and when he can't. And with Keon, it's never been about, I'm just going to go because of NIL. Because if that was true, folks, I'm telling you right now, he would have decommitted 6 months ago, right? But who are the influencers around him who then can maybe be influenced, if you catch my drift. And sometimes I wonder if maybe there's a little bit of that going on with Keon in this instance. But at the end of the day, I don't think this was an NIL-driven deal. Am I going to sit there and say NIL is irrelevant? No, it's not. Because I think the NIL can maybe help those schools now that he is decommitted, but this wasn't a decommitment that was purely about Keon wanting money. It's not. So we told you it was like that with Dante Moore, and we told you some of the other players where NIL is going to be an influence. I just there's no intel to say that with Alabama. I think it's when I talk to it's people it's Saban's track record of first round draft picks. It's, it's selling the pitch to people. Oh, you can still get a good education here. It's just not as hard as it is at Notre Dame. All the Southern kids are around you. This is what 5-stars do. Like that's been a weird comment that I've gotten from some people on the other side is like, well, he's a 5-star now. So what? What does that have to do with anything? And so there's a lot of layers to this. And so if you're just going to chalk this up to NIL, you're mistaken and you're being a little short-sighted. If you're going to say that NIL isn't a factor at all, again, I think you're being a little misguided and narrow-focused. NIL is always a factor, right? But it's not always the driving factor. NIL was a factor, Ryan, for kids that you and I know that are committed to Notre Dame, but it wasn't the driving factor. Right. They know, I could probably get more upfront money by going to this SEC school, but I also know I have opportunities at Notre Dame to get NIL money. And then the other benefits of being at Notre Dame are going to weigh. I mean, I can't wait till after this class is signed and we can share some of the backstory on some of these NIL stuff of kids that are coming to Notre Dame.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We know of at least 2 to 3 kids that are in the Notre Dame class that turned down big money NIL deals, like multiple ones. And like Brian said, we'll talk about that when we can. Brian, the one thing that I wanted to mention, though, that someone said in the chat and was kind of a question, could Notre Dame have done anything different? I think the answer is no, right? Like, I mean, this isn't a Notre Dame misstep. This isn't a Notre Dame botch this. There are other factors into this recruitment that is out of Notre Dame's control. So I would just like to say point blank, no, I don't think Notre Dame could have done anything differently in this one. In my opinion.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say Notre Dame could have done different is maybe started looking around sooner. But honestly, up until 3 weeks ago, I mean, the message from Keon and the people around him were consistent. It's nothing to worry about. This is the deal. It's really been the last 3 weeks that this has started to change. And we've seen Notre Dame throw offers out in that time. And it's just one of those things where this is the way it's gone. And it sucks and it's a big loss. And what it does, it also makes other losses harder now. It makes the Jason Moore loss sting even more now. Because you were okay with losing Jason Moore because, you had Keon Keeley. Well, now you don't have Keon Keeley or Jason Moore. Now, is this still a pretty darn good defensive line class? Sure. And they're going to add to it. They're going to get a 4th guy in this class. But it's not going to be the same. Because, look, we could spin it all we want. Keon's, he's this, he's that. Forget that. Right? Keon's, in my opinion, the best player in the country. You lose the best player in the country, it's a blow. And it's the second big blow because they also had Dante Moore as a silent commit. So you're talking about having a generational class because of those 2 kids, and now they're both gone. And I think that's to me a big blow for Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, that's why it stinks. I mean, we've talked about this, Brian, right? It's not just in a vacuum. Keon Keeley, in my opinion, is the best player in the recruiting class, just in general across the nation. And the fact now that, I mean, we were thinking like, you have a Keon Keeley, you have a great class outside of them too. I mean, I don't want to misevaluate the talents of Brennan Vernon and Boubacar Traore and Devin Houston. It's a really good class outside of them, but now you don't have the assurance up top as far as the elite level prospects with now that Jason Moore and Keon Keeley are off the board for Notre Dame. So I'm sure we'll get in at some point. I don't know if you want to do it during this podcast, Brian, but like a couple guys to watch as far as the guys we know of, not necessarily the guys that we heard about, this morning that we were talking about, but
we'll do that. We'll do that down the road. I mean, there'll be a time and a place for that as we continue to put together more names, because I don't want to talk about some names now and then more added and we learn more. We'll get to that. We'll talk about that on the board over the weekend as we get more and more names, because I also want to make sure that we're not putting out names like I got some names today, but I need to make sure, okay, who can I discuss and who can I not? Because I think Notre Dame is trying to get into a thing where they're trying, and I just put an intel piece on the board, the message board about Peyton Bowen, Jeremiah Love, and quarterback recruiting. Same thing with quarterback. There's some guys that Notre Dame is actively recruiting, but they don't want it out there because they're committed to other schools, right? And so I think that's kind of where they're at. So I just want to make sure that we are not putting out names that we're not supposed to put out. Some of them are already out there, right? Like they offered Jaden Moore recently, who committed to Oregon. They've offered Caleb Herring. There's been guys that we've seen out there associated with Notre Dame.
Blake Purchase.
Yes, Blake Purchase. We just want to make sure that we're doing our, we're doing right by our sources and our intel. So we will get into that at some point in time here moving forward, Ryan. But at the end of the day, this is a blow, right? And there are things to counter with, like, look, Notre Dame still has the number 3 ranked class in the country. You know, like I've heard people say, like, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to like walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We don't need to be in situations where we spin it to where no big deal. They're totally fine. They still got this guy, that guy, the other guy. You know, we can also say, look, this is a huge loss. We can say, but Viper has not been the thing holding Notre Dame back from being a championship program, and there's still a lot of talent on the roster. Ryan, you and I have talked this past week about things we've heard from sources about Josh Burnham and how good he's looked, and Aiden Gobira and how good he has looked. So there are certainly things to be encouraged by, but it doesn't take away the sting of losing Keon Keeley, because as good as those players are, they can, you know, Notre Dame can still have a great Viper position. Keon Keeley is still an elite player, and anytime you don't get him, it's a blow, especially when you, like, it's one thing if you recruit a guy and then just miss him. Like, ever since Jason Moore decommitted, I think most people are just like, oh, okay, you know, you took your swing and you didn't get him, and best of luck to him and move on. But when you've had a kid committed for over a year, it just adds to the sting. It really adds to the sting. But I've heard this other thing from people, and this is where you got to say, okay, now, like, what some people hate is the people like, everything is fine. We're Notre Dame. Everything is fine. Well, Notre Dame's in a good place. You know, we don't need Keon. Well, yeah, you do. If you want to win a championship, this is the kind of kid that helps with that. Can you still win one without him? Of course. But is it make it easier? Of course. I hate that, right? It's like, okay, don't try to make everything out to be, you know, sunshine and rainbows. This isn't the Lego movie where, like, everything is awesome, right? Like, this sucks. But what we're also not going to do is talk about how, you know, well, now it's just a normal Notre Dame class. No, it's not. Right now, if Notre Dame doesn't sign another player, this class still ranks high, still has more points than any Notre Dame class outside of the 2013 class that had Jalen Smith. And then that doesn't even include taking away Eddie Vanderdoes, right? You know, for the 247 rankings. It's also on Rivals. It's right now, without adding another player, higher than every Notre Dame class they've had since Rivals started in 2002, except for the 2008 class and the 2013 class. It's significantly higher than all the others. And you know, that's the reality of it. So even today, without Keon Keeley, without a quarterback, this class still ranks higher than Notre Dame's class last year, which finished 6th.
With an unknown as your staff right now, because you haven't seen him coach a game, and you're fighting against the NIL battle too. Yep. So there's it's a lot of context. I know. Right. I mean, to your point, Brian, I think that people get very hyperbolic one way or the other. I mean, because like last night, I mean, I'm fully transparent here. I was like, wow, that sucks, man. When we heard about it a few days ago,
Ryan was distraught. Ryan, you knew it was coming, and you were still completely bummed out last night.
I was really bummed about it, because, like, for a couple of days I was like, oh, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe there's you know, some.
Well, that was true, actually.
Yeah,
that's the one thing we'll give backstory. So this was supposed to happen Monday, and Keon was struggling to actually make the final decision, which does lend credibility to, like, there is a connection there with Keon and Notre Dame. There is, whether we like it or not. It's just, if you're Notre Dame, okay, I get that, but, you know, I mean, if you're dating a girl and you've been dating for a long time and she just decides she wants to go see other people, I mean, you can either say, okay, fine, I'm gonna go do what I got to do, or you're gonna keep begging her to be with you as she's out there, you know, going out on dates with other dudes. I don't know about you, but peace. Now, if you come back to me down the road, okay, we may have a conversation, but, you know, that's kind of where Notre Dame is at. But I do think this was a hard decision for Keon. I do. Agree. And whether you like it or not, the influences on social media had an impact on this. Because as soon as you start taking visits, there were some pretty awful things said to him on social media. Now, you could say maybe he shouldn't have been bothered by it or whatever, but he's 17 years old. You know, like, I'm not preaching to the 17-year-old to sack up and put your big boy pants on. When adults are going at him like that, you know, that's just part of the reality of today's world. And, you know, and I would hope that he would not react to that stuff negatively, but I also don't know how I would have reacted at 17 years old, because I didn't grow up in an era where I had to deal with that at 17 years old. First of all, because there was no social media. Number two, I was a 5-star recruit, so I don't know what it was like. So there's just a lot to this, a lot of layers to this that make this a weird thing. But again, this is still an excellent recruiting class, Ryan.
Yeah.
And, we do feel good about where things stand with other players, and they're going to add to this class. And so if they simply just add the 2 players that we know they lead for right now, which is Jeremiah Love and Tayshawn Lyons, this is the best class they've ever had under Rivals, and it's not close. It'll also be significantly higher than any class they've ever had under 247. Now, that matters because 247 goes back to 2011. Rivals goes back to 2002.
Yeah.
Rivals was the thing before when Marcus Freeman was still in high school. And this is already their second highest ranked class, or third highest, second highest ranked class, because you got to take out Eddie Vanderdoes of Rivals. If you take Eddie Vanderdoes away from Rivals, it's their second best class behind the 08 class. If they simply just add Jeremiah Love, they move up to the best class Notre Dame has ever had. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time, people. We can say this sucks. This is a blow. There's no way to spin losing Keon Keeley. None. But then that doesn't change the other reality of it. This is still a really good class, and they're not done. They're going to get a quarterback. They're going to get at least one wide receiver. Well, not at least one wide receiver. They're going to get another wide receiver. Who is that going to be? We have a pretty good idea, but we got to, Tayshawn Lyons has got to get on campus and see how things go. We feel really good about where they are with Jeremiah Love. We feel they're going to get another defensive end. Who will it be? Will it be a 3-star projectable kind of kid, like an Adi Ogundiji type of kid that they've had success with? Another Isaiah Foskey type who's not a top 200 player, but a guy that's got a lot high ceiling? Will it be that kind of guy? Or will they be able to flip a higher ceiling guy or a higher floor guy? That we're going to find out. But it doesn't take away from how much this sucks, and how much this sucks doesn't take away from how good this class still is. And I think that's where we've got to find that sweet spot as an organization, as a company. It's how we got to find that sweet spot as a community of Irish fans. It's all of it's kind of intertwined together, and that's the sweet spot we're going to find. We're not going to be here and just talk about how, this is no big deal. We're also not going to be here and talk about how, this is a situation where, it's the most devastating thing. And, it's like, this is not that scene from Waterboy, which is like one of my favorite scenes in Waterboy. Like, we suck again. You remember that? That scene where Waterboy's not going to play? This ain't that. And if you think that's it, that's a you problem, I would say. You can be bummed and pissed and upset about Keon leaving, but at the same time, realize this is still a pretty good situation. And Ryan, you made a great point to me when we were talking today. Right now, this is all what they're doing now is with Marcus Freeman as the head coach with an 0-1 record.
Right.
We don't know what it's going to look like a year from now. What if it's 8-4? What's it? Will the rose be off? Will the bloom be off the rose? What if they go 11-1 again? Now all of a sudden, okay, this guy can coach. And I think those are the things that there's just a lot of unknowns. But now that's the next step for this coaching staff. You want to make it easier to keep a Keon Keeley next year, to land and maybe keep an Elijah Rushing type of guy, then what you do is you go out there and you win. And that's the reality. That's where Notre Dame is. That's where they have to be, right? That's the next step. Go out and start winning some football games. Yep. And you're going to lose guys to NIL, and you're going to get guys who don't care about NIL. You're going to have both of those things. And that's where they're at.
Well, I think, Brian, too, if a player is that induced, by NIL right now, there's also a situation where, even if they end up choosing Notre Dame and NIL is a huge factor, what's to stop them from transferring down the road too? So there's a lot of layers to it in my opinion, but all I'll say here is this can quickly change very quickly. Cause I know people have recency bias, right? It's like you didn't get Ronan Hannafin and Keon Keeley just flipped very, very close together.
Big losses.
100%. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It stinks. I mean, what are we going to say about it? That's the analysis, right? Here's the great analysis for me. That stinks as a fan, from a fan perspective, right? But it can change. That doesn't mean that this has to be just that. If Marcus Freeman and the staff come out and they win football games and they're able to get more momentum in that regard, then things can change in a heartbeat. And even if they don't change from where we are right now, again, if you get a Jeremiah Love and you get a couple other players, it's still a really good class. It's not the end of the world, but it's also a big blow. I think that we can agree that it has to be both sides. It's not just one side, I feel like, again, we go hyperbolic to one side or the other.
Sure.
Let's stay in between. That's the context of it. The context is that this stinks. This is a huge blow. But it's also context that it's a really good class outside of Keon, right?
Right.
The loss to Keon.
Well,
But
for context there, Ryan, right now they're
Mhm.
ranked third. And if Notre Dame does not add another player, this is where their current points would rank on 247's composite rankings. This is at the end of the year, this is where it would rank. So starting 22, moving back. So 22 to 2015, 6, 7, 7, 5, 7, 8, 5, 5. Most of those years would be highest ranked recruiting class they've had other than 13.
Mhm.
If they simply land the two kids that we think that they lead for right now, which is Jeremiah Love and Tayshawn Lyons, just those two kids. So we're not talking about a replacement for Keon. We're not talking about a quarterback. We're not talking about Samuel and Pemba, none of those kind of guys, right? Because we don't see Notre Dame getting a Samuel and Pemba right now. Just the two kids they lead for. This is where this class would rank: 5th, 6th, 6th, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 4th, and 3rd. So since 2013, this class would rank 3rd in 2 different years, and then the top 5 in 3 other years. So this is not a typical Notre Dame class. And we just had a question from someone who said, well, I just want to bring it up because I want to do justice to the question, because I think he's asking it in a good, from a good place. There's no like emotion behind it. This is a good question from Rob Thidoff. I think this is a fair question. It says, Brian and Ryan, is it safe to say that we will not have a gap closing class until we first see results in the field? Saban had to win the title in 2009 for the recruiting dominoes to fall. Number one, this is still a gap closing class. There's no question about it. Again, we just pointed to it, because what does gap closing mean? It doesn't mean that you're immediately on the same level with those teams. It means that's gap erased, right? You sign the number one class, gap erased. Are you closing the gap? And when I can point out that if they don't land another kid, and they will, they're going to land at least 4 more kids in this class, in my opinion, based on what we know and where things are. They're going to well, let me rephrase. They're going to get at least 3. I'm going to be safe, because if for some reason they don't get Jeremiah Love, and we think that they, as of right now, we like where they stand. There's not like another guy they're going to go out and try to replace him with. Like, we want him.
He's the running back. Yeah,
right. He's the guy they want, not that he's filling a need for a specific position. They just want him because he's that good. And he's such a great Notre Dame fit. He's a 4.0 student and all that kind of stuff. So if they don't get him, I'll just say minimum 3. They're going to get at least 3 guys. Then that puts them in a situation where you're talking about a top 5 class. That's closing the gap, because closing the gap is, are you, from where you are now to where they are you closing that gap? And this class absolutely closed that gap. Now, would you close it even more with Dante Moore and Keon Keeley? I would argue that's borderline gap erasing.
Yes.
But yes, you're closing the gap more with those kids. There's no debating that. There's no spinning that. This still closes the gap. Again, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, Ryan. That's what we need to be able to have a conversation about at this point in time.
Well, I was going to say too that you could even go a little more specific into the positions, right? Like, I mean, with Keon Keeley in the class, I think the defensive end class, just let's keep it the defensive ends, not even defensive line in general. The edge class that it would have been with Keon Keeley, that's a gap erase class, in my opinion. If you're talking about Keon Keeley with Brendan Vernon and Boubacar Traore, like, yes.
Especially, Ryan, with where they already are on the D-line.
100%.
Correct.
Yeah. When you add to where they have already kind of built up through there, 100%. But now the point of the matter, to your point, Brian, is I would say that even with Keon not in the class, Brendan, if it just ends and we think that there's going to be another defensive lineman in the class that's potentially an edge player, so it might not, but either way, let's not underrate that Brendan Vernon and Boubacar Traore are both very good players, right? Like, they close the gap. They are gap closing type of football players. The gap might not be erased, but you are still closing the gap with that.
Right.
You do need to continue to add talent to the defensive line group. There's no doubt about it.
Yes. They need another defensive lineman. There's no doubt. But again, you still have 2 guys on your defensive line that are ranked in the top 100 by at least 2 recruiting services. And then you've got Devin Houston, who's a top 200 kid by most recruiting services. So again, it's like, we need to be able to say this sucks and the sky is, and also say the sky is not falling. We need to find that sweet spot, because both things are true, in my opinion. So, that's where you're at. So it's just
an annoying rainy day right now, right? And the sun will come up again.
That's right.
Let's continue with the metaphors. I love.
That sounds like a conversation you and I had last night, Ryan.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, let's move on to some team stuff, Ryan. Let's move on to some team stuff. Obviously, some more bad news for Notre Dame. An expression I think we probably read more on the message board last night than any others. This is why we can't have nice things, or why can't we have nice things? But actually, a little bit of good news today, if we're being honest. So Marcus Freeman announced today that Jarrett Patterson has a sprained foot. Notre Dame team captain, or at least was a team captain last year. We would anticipate him being a team captain again today, or this year, I should say. And starting left guard Jarrett Patterson is now out with a sprained foot. Coach Freeman said today in his press conference that he expects him to be out 10 days and then reevaluate and see where he's going. He is questionable for the Ohio State game. I would okay, so that's what Notre Dame said. Me personally, from some of the intel I've gathered, I would say I was expecting him to say doubtful or out. So for him to say questionable we're in a better place today than we were yesterday in regard to the news we were getting about Jarrett Patterson. So, and this is what, we held off. We said, look, we're not going to talk about this. And this is why, because if we would have reported last night what we were heard, we would have been told he's going to miss the first 3 to 4 games of the year. That's what we were told.
Yeah.
And this is why you wait to see how things are going. Let all the medical stuff happen, get the second opinions, let the swelling heal so they can get a better look at it. I mean, there's all types of things that have to happen. And so when you look at kind of where things are with that, it's actually kind of a positive sign. Having said that, even if he plays against Ohio State, he's not going to be 100%. So you're either going to get a not 100% Jarrett Patterson, or you're going to get Jarrett Patterson's replacement. So I think that to me is kind of where, this is a little bit of a question mark. And we kind of hinted a little bit about this yesterday in our O-line conversation, but the reality is that this is going to put a lot of pressure on the other offensive linemen, Ryan, especially in my opinion, Zeke Correll and the tackles. This is going to put a lot of pressure on them to really be on top of their game when they get to September 3rd against Ohio State.
I mean, I think so. I think that, there was a comfortability with the move back of Zeke Correll for a second there, Brian, because you're like, okay, you have Jarrett Patterson, who's incredibly experienced to his left. You have Josh Luck, who's very experienced to his right. Like, that gives you a lot of confidence. Now you're going to be working at left guard, and they announced that, Coach Freeman talked about a couple of the potential replacements. They said that Andrew Kristofic is one of the guys that has been working in, as well as Rocco Spindler. Obviously, Andrew Kristofic just played a lot of football last year, right? So that does give you some positivity to the fact of like, hey, injuries stink. There's no doubt. It's very unfortunate that it happened. But if Jarrett Patterson is going to miss the game, at least you have one option on top of another talented player that has played a lot of football in the past, right? Like, that was we said it was the silver lining to last year was, although the offensive line was a mess, didn't play very well, a lot of guys did play. So there's experience there behind Jarrett Patterson with a guy like an Andrew Kristofic, and then maybe a Rocco Spindler, depending on who wins the backup to be the key backup there in case they do have to move on. So it's unsettling. It is. I mean, if we're talking about just being down a really good football player, but the positive is that you do have some depth behind him that you feel pretty decent about, like you feel okay about it.
Right.
I personally would just be like, if this is just my opinion, if Jarrett Patterson's out and Andrew Kristofic plays, it's not the end of the world. I think Andrew Kristofic could do a solid job.
Yeah, I think Ryan, for me, it comes down to like, look, you're not going to be as good without Jarrett Patterson, right? It's kind of like the Keon Keeley thing. Like let's not sit here and pretend like after we've talked about Jarrett Patterson maybe being a day 1, day 2 pick and all this other, like, no, look, totally fine not having him in the game. It's a blow.
For sure.
I think where we come to is it's a blow for the opener. I mean, I don't think the next 3 games are really games where you're worried about losing because you don't have Jarrett Patterson. But for the opener, it's a big blow. So for me, it comes down to, yes, I think Andrew Kristofic can step into left guard and play quality football. Coach Freeman also said Rocco Spindler is another name that's battling for that position. One of 2 things is true in this instance. If that's what happens, either A, Andrew Kristofic is not playing as well as he did last year, or Rocco has really upped his game. Hopefully it is the latter. I believe it's the latter. But I would expect Andrew Kristofic to be the guy. I doubt Notre Dame wants to go into that game with basically an entire new interior of guys that haven't played there in those positions in a while. I think Andrew Kristofic could do for this line what he did last year, be a steadying force. He wasn't great last year. He was just steady. But what you're not going to beat Ohio State with steady offensive line play, right? I mean, that's a fact. So what this does is now it puts a lot of pressure on the other two interior players to raise their game against Ohio State. Yeah. Josh Lugg has to have a big game against Ohio State. Zeke Correll has to have a big game against Ohio State. You and I anticipate the tackles are going to. We're comfortable with where the tackles are. But Andrew Kristofic has to be who he was last year, but more importantly, Correll and Lugg have to raise their level of play. Because we saw in the bowl game, the pass pro against Oklahoma State was pretty good. Like, really good, actually. Couldn't run the football. No. And so now you're talking about, 3 of the 5 starters from that game are back at the positions they played in that bowl game. The coaching is better, but it can't just be Harry Hiestand. Being here is like the end-all, be-all. Guys have to raise their level of play. I think that's what we need to see. And over the next 10 days, we'll get to see that. The good news is, right, not the good news. The blessing in disguise for Notre Dame is Jarrett Patterson missed all the spring with a pec tear. So this unit has worked together without him a lot in the last 5 months, right? So they've worked
a lot more without him than with him. So, yeah.
It's a good point. I mean, the start, if Kristofic's the starter or Rocco plays, the reality is Notre Dame will have a lot of work with that starting lineup than they would have with a starting lineup with Jarrett Patterson in it, as far as where guys are in their current positions. Yeah, that still doesn't mean they're better off without him. They are better off with Jarrett Patterson. End of statement, period. Nothing else to say.
I don't think anybody would question that.
No, no. I just want to make sure people don't think we're saying that.
Right.
But what we are saying is the good news is that it's not like you've now got 2 weeks and 2 days to figure out this offensive line. This group has played together a lot. And that's the news. So the communication will be smooth, right? I mean, Andrew Kristofic spent a lot of time communicating with Joe Alt last year. I mean, they literally started side by side for the final 6 games of the season, 7 games of the season. So there's communication. They played together in the spring. Rocco got a decent number of snaps in the spring because Andrew was a little banged up late in the spring. Rocco got a lot of first-team reps. So this is not new. Like, throwing Rocco out to get some first-team reps in this competition isn't like, oh, my gosh, I'm now getting first-team reps. He got first-team reps in the spring. So it's just more of this is a bad thing for Notre Dame, but here's why we think they're going to be okay, because this unit's played a lot together. I think when you get in trouble with the offensive line, Ryan, is when you have an injury to a guy that's kind of been there, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, now we're starting over from scratch, right? That's where, because communication and timing are 2 incredibly important things for an offensive line. That's why we're stressing the fact that this is going to be a smooth transition from a timing and communication standpoint. It's not a smooth transition saying Andrew Kristofic's as good as Jarrett Patterson. It's more about, can this unit play as one over the next 2 weeks without Jarrett Patterson? I'm not worried about that. The question is will other people raise their level of execution now that Jarrett's out? I think that's the big question for me, Ryan.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a question, because you're also putting a lot of pressure on. I mean, we keep talking about these tackles like they're just 100%. They're going to be dudes, and it's like, I think they are, but it still needs to happen, right? Like, the maturation needs to happen. The one thing I'll say though about it, Brian, is I was actually very happy to hear this news from Jarrett Patterson's perspective, because of everything we were hearing, and then this is just a fault in my mind, but as soon as I hear something with a foot as an offensive lineman, I'm like, oh no, man, I hope he didn't break something or tear something. I was like, okay, thankfully it's just a sprain. You don't want him to miss a game at all, but I thought that it could have been a whole lot worse for Jarrett Patterson. So I'm happy that it's not nearly as big an issue as we once thought it was.
Yeah. So they're going to have to figure that out. There was some good news today, and now we'll kind of transition to that. It's kind of like, hey, let's just get the I don't know how you are, but whenever someone has asked me, like, hey, would you rather get the good news first or the bad news first? I'm like, give me the bad news first. Like, I want to deal with that emotion and then move on to the positive. So that's just me, and that's the way that we're going today.
If I could add one negative thing before we move on to the positive, is that one more note is that Michael Carmody is working through concussion protocol.
Correct.
Just so everybody if anybody did not listen to Marcus Freeman.
And he's been out for a little bit, because when we did the offensive line video last week at the practice we were at last week, he was in street clothes.
Yeah.
So he has been out for a little bit. And so the good news is Marcus Freeman said that next week, which means over a week in advance of the Ohio State game, that they plan on taking the red jersey off of Logan Diggs. That means he's cleared to play at that point in time. It's basically what that means. It means he can go out there and test the shoulder a little bit, and then the final step is officially getting cleared. So Ryan, when we were talking about this offense in the summer, we were working with the understanding that Logan Diggs was going to be out for at least a month. We were hoping he'd get it back in October. Now you're talking about getting him back in the opener. Between that, I've heard Chris Tyree has been his normal explosive self, and I've heard Audric Estime has been a man in fall camp. Now if you can get Logan Diggs back, you start saying like, okay, you're down Jarrett Patterson, but we got a running back that we think is pretty good that we weren't expecting to have. I think that to me was a very positive sign, because you've said all along, I agree with you, that if this running back depth chart is healthy, even this is post Jadarian Price going down, if the rest of this running back group can stay healthy, it has a chance to be one of the 5 to 8 to 10 best running back groups in the country from a production, impact, all around play standpoint. So this is huge for Notre Dame.
Oh, it's absolutely huge. I mean, again, just kind of coupling all the talents together of an Estime with a Chris Tyree with the potential return of Logan Diggs, I think it's massive. And I would say this too. I mean, you mentioned a little bit, Brian. It's like when we originally heard this injury and just kind of hearing some tea leaves, I am very surprised that he's getting back this quick, man. Like he made, and shout out to Logan, man. He made a very quick recovery in this regard, right? So this is huge. And I know we always worry about shoulder injuries with running backs and lowering level and doing all that type of stuff. But the fact that he's been able to come back this quick and confidently, I mean, we saw him just working through the bag drills. And I'm like, man, he doesn't look like he has too much worry in that shoulder in him too, right? So big time news for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame is going to have a legitimate chance to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes, they're going to have to establish something in the run game, right? They're going to have to chip away at that defense. And I think if you have Logan Diggs, that adds more fuel to the arsenal to be able to potentially do so. So it's an absolutely huge, huge potential comeback for Logan Diggs and a huge addition for Notre Dame that we at one point were probably not expecting for game one.
Marcus Freeman had some comments today about Tobias Merriweather as well. And you could just kind of, when you watch the press conference, you could kind of see him. I felt, maybe I'm reading too much into this. You could just kind of see him like, okay, I want to praise him, but I got to hold back a little bit. Like you could just kind of see him getting fired up a little bit about Tobias. He mentioned that he made some big time.
A little bit.
They had a scrimmage today, right? That's where we'll come from. And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit, but you could just kind of see him be like, okay, like we got ourselves a football player. Like, and every coach has that moment, right? Like with a young guy that's got to step up and emerge. You have it to where like, okay, I think this kid can be really good, but the lights got to go on. And then there's that day in fall camp, and you hope that it's later because you don't really care what a kid does the first 3 days because he's fresh, he hasn't been hit yet, and all that kind of, we have full pads on. You hope that you can get to the middle of fall camp and be like, okay, he's starting to come along. And he talked about pushing past the freshman wall. That is a very real thing, a very real thing. And hear him push back that. And then in today's scrimmage, which Coach Freeman said is kind of the last big scrimmage they had, I thought I heard him say that correctly.
He said, if I remember correctly, that this would be the last like full contact going to the grounds opportunity until the first game. Yeah.
So they'll have some scrimmage periods, but not like this. And they had officials and all that kind of stuff. And for him to step up and make some big time plays in this, which Coach Freeman said, we've had some other people kind of reach out and say like, this kid is really coming along, is a great, great sign. So hearing that was big. The other thing he noted is that the offense won the scrimmage today. So I've done some further digging on this, and apparently this is the second time in a row that they've had a scrimmage, like a live setting where the offense has won the battle. The defense was ahead of the offense for a while. The offense is starting to come along. And a comment that I had heard today, I've now talked to 3 different people about this, is that this last week for Tyler Buckner has been really, really good. And the defense is, I think I was told, like basically every time the first team offense was on the field today, they scored, basically. So that's, awesome. That's a great sign because we know the defense is good, right? I mean, we know the defense is good. No, all but one, because there was the interception that Tyler Buckner had on third down. So he's looked really good. He's coming along. He's more comfortable. I think now that he's the battle is kind of over. You wonder, okay, where's the young quarterback going to go? Is he going to be like, okay, I've arrived? Like I always think of the scene from The Program, right? Like, starting defense, city to table, like getting first in the depth chart was like the goal. And now that I'm there, it's like, okay, I've accomplished my goal. No. That's just the first step. Like now it's time to go accomplish your goal. So you wonder, like, where would he be as a young player? And from what I have been told, he has really kind of, okay, now that this is over with, now it's time for me to really go take control of this thing. And so far last week, we've heard that. Now, I promise you, we will hear intel about how he had a crap practice at some point in time between now and then. That's just the nature of fall camp. But to hear he's stringing some really good practices along now against a pretty good defense is, I think, a really good sign for Notre Dame and the direction this is going. And that was a question I asked Coach Freeman today. Is like, look, the offensive coaches want to dominate the scrimmage. The defensive coaches want to dominate the scrimmage. As a head coach, you're like, okay, I don't really want necessarily either side to dominate.
Right.
But you're starting to hear the defense controlled action early. The offense is now starting to control the action. It's going to swing back and forth. That's a really good sign coming out of fall camp, Ryan. If you're trying to look at it from a head coaching standpoint, you're here. Both sides of the ball are doing what they need to do, and that's a great, great sign.
Well, I think the most positive is the trajectory of everything. I remember you were talking about last year, right, Brian? It's like the defense is just killing the offense, and you're like, wow, either this defense is amazing or this offense isn't very good. And it kind of was a little bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the offense just was not great last year. This year, it's a really positive sign because you expected the defense to be really good. So you went into the spring and the defense started out hot. They were ahead of the offense. But the fact that the offense has now come back and to be able to kind of reverse that momentum a little bit in the spring.
Like after all the injuries.
Positive. Yeah.
Because they didn't have Jarrett Patterson today. They didn't have Avery Davis today. I'm pretty sure Joe Wilkins is still not back to full go. I would be surprised if I heard he was out there today.
Logan Diggs obviously isn't in contact yet. Exactly. So the fact that that's the trajectory we're going on, and we already knew that Notre Dame was going to have a good to very good defense, that gives me a really positive sign because clearly the offense has taken their step forward. It hasn't just been like staying a steady pace and maybe there's no separation. Like the offense has clearly taken the challenge and been like, okay, we know the defense is ahead of us right now. We need to fight back. And we have a lot of, obviously, we keep talking about this sophomore heavy team, right? And you just mentioned Tobias Merriweather, who's only a freshman. So there's some younger guys on the offensive side of the football who are, kind of easing along. And I feel like this is a really good trajectory too, especially with this last scrimmage, because you want guys to start to not peak, but to play their best near the end of camp to get ready for the season. So I think this is a great sign for the offense, just their trajectory that they're moving on.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of really where you need to be, Ryan, is you don't necessarily want to start fall camp off blazing fast because you're like, okay, can you really maintain this level of play? And like you said, like last year, the defense was so good. I think, and I will contend this, no one's going to change my mind from this. I think part of the reason the defense struggled so much in the first two games is because of how bad the offense was, because of how they just dominated them in the trenches. The receivers not being able to get off press, those type of things. Like Sean Davis and I were talking last night, and it's just like, how sad is it that we're hearing a fifth-year senior talk about a release package? They have a release package now.
For the first time.
Yeah. Freaking 5 years in, and they got a release package now. It's like, how the heck did this – I almost cursed. How the heck did this team win 11 games last year? They have talent. That's how they won freaking 11 games last year. But I think that's the thing now is, Mike Mickens' crew is being challenged in a way they weren't last year. Not just with athleticism, but these kids are learning how to play. Al Washington's unit is being challenged this year way more than Mike Elson's was last year. It's not Mike Elson's fault. It's not the defensive team's fault. Right. It's like, I think I'm pretty good, man. It's like, just then you realize like, oh no, it's not that I'm that good. It's like these guys are that bad, or I am that good, but I haven't been pushed to the level I need to be pushed to be successful because I was able to get away with things because that unit sucked. That's like when you play a bad team, you say like, remember the New Mexico game a couple years ago? Notre Dame won like 66 to what was it, like 13 or something, 10 or something like that.
Bob Davie,
you really watch that game, you're like, they didn't really play that well, especially on offense. Like, Javon McKinley isn't catching a 3-yard crossing route and breaking 47 tackles against Ohio State or Alabama or Clemson. It's like, you're not – I mean, they're running like a simple jet sweep, and like New Mexico has no clue what's going on, and they're running for easy touchdowns. Like that team sucked.
I felt the same way about when they played UMass a few years ago. You remember that?
Yes.
I was like, they
Yeah.
weren't that
I mean,
impressive against
yeah,
UMass.
they
They were
ripped
just so
that off
much
a
better.
freaking 82-yard touchdown run. If it's not for CJ Sanders ripping off a punt return at the end of the first half, it was like 20-20 at halftime.
Yeah.
They were just terrible. Same thing with Bowling Green.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be challenged, right? Because that's how you really get to know where you are. And from what we've heard, both units are pushing each other. It's a back and forth, and that's really where you want to be. As a defensive coordinator, you don't want your guys dominating scrimmages every single time. Now, I mean, you don't want to get dominated either, but there's sometimes like, you know what? Good. We needed to get exposed here because I know we've been getting away with stuff, and now we're not. And so, I think those are the different things for me that I like to hear. And like some people, may ask, like, well, Coach Freeman's explaining the interception that he threw.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I know where Coach Freeman's coming from because he's a defensive coach. But for me, I don't mind that.
No.
It's like, because if I'm Coach Reese, I don't mind that. So what he basically said was he was trying to as he got near the inbounds, he kind of threw across his body trying to make a play, and Tariq Bracy picked him off. There's coaching to be done there, but you don't want to break that spirit of always looking to make a play. Part of it too is where's the ball. You know what I mean? Like, and where did he get picked off? If you're at midfield and the ball
situation,
yeah, and if he throws the ball 15 yards downfield, it gets intercepted, and the guy's tackled 35, I don't mind that as much. Mm-hmm. If you're at your own 35, or you're potentially in field goal range, or maybe you're in 4-down territory, yeah, you don't want to throw that pick. So there's a time and a place where I like that aggressiveness. And so I think those are the things that Tyler needs to learn. So as we've said all along, I want to hear that he's throwing those kind of interceptions in practice, because now he knows can't do that, right? But this is what you can do, because remember this play that you made the other day, right? Where you don't want to throw across your body is by the time you get to the sideline. Where you may throw across your body is about halfway between the pocket and the sideline, because that's when there's still openings, right? And that's the thing. You're like, I've got some highlights on my college tape where I'm thrown across my body, and one time I'm kind of thrown and a guy flies over me, right? Worked out well. But I also have a play on my highlight tape where I tried to throw across my body near the goal, near the end zone, or not near the sideline, and I got picked off, because at that point in time, they're just sitting there. They're not flowing to the ball anymore. Like, you got nowhere else to go, dude. I'm not going to keep chasing you to the sideline. You keep running if you're a defensive back. Those are parts of the learning process too for Tyler. But he did that around other dominance, and I think that's the encouraging thing.
100%.
So you love hearing that. You definitely love hearing that, and hear the offense is starting to make some plays. So I think those are Alan English says, wait, why are interceptions on your highlight tape, Brian? It wasn't a highlight tape. It was sort of like a, kind of putting my season together, like things I need to improve upon, things I didn't improve upon. So like my highlight tape has only that, but like I also put cut ups, because again, this is VHS. It wasn't easy to carry a whole bunch of VHS tapes back home when you're at a D3 school. Like, I could just get on the computer, and do this, but more of like my own teaching tapes, when I go home and work over the summer, and we didn't do summer school at college and all that kind of stuff. We had to go home and work because we were paying our own way to school. But yes, Alan, that is what I was referring to.
VHSs were awful. Can we have a quick tangent on that? When he used to like tear up the tape and in the VCR, and it was awful. Not great.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly like HD quality either, my friend.
It was not. Oh man, I remember the days of trying to send it out to colleges, though, when you would bring in the blank VHSs into your coach, and he would have that little machine that would like sync everything up to it and stuff, and it was awful. Those days were terrible.
Yep.
Let's not go back there.
No, let's definitely not go back there. So some things I wish we could go back to the way it used to be. That ain't one of them. But then, I learned not to complain, because then I'd listen to the older coaches that would talk about how they had like the film, they'd have to splice the film up, like cut the film up and tape it together and do all. So forget that.
Yes.
At least we had machines that we could do that editing stuff with. So anyway, Ryan, so those are some positives that we heard from the team today. Obviously, you like hearing when the offense is kind of coming along. Those are certainly positive things. And, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the key, right? I mean, there's talent at receiver. Okay. They got to come along. Lorenzo Styles has to be more assertive, has to be more consistent, right? They need Tobias Merriweather to grow up in a hurry. They need Xavier Watts, who's now back at receiver, playing. And this is what Coach Freeman says, he's kind of doing a little bit of both. But I expect him to have a shot to play this year. I expect him to play this year. The tight ends are coming along. I keep hearing good things about Eli Raridan and Holden Stakes. They're going to play this year. They're going to play this year. The running backs are doing well. It's just depth. That's the concern, right? Like even right now, Ryan, I have no doubt about the talent that this offense has. It's like you're at the point now where like, okay, you can't afford to lose another receiver. You can't afford to lose another back or an offensive lineman. I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, no, and we knew going into the fall after the spring, we knew that there were positive signs for the offense, but they obviously needed to continue to develop because this is from our breakdown. This is the volatile side of the football. We think that we have a pretty good understanding what defense can be. I think there's still a higher ceiling, obviously, there, but there's a bigger chasm from a floor ceiling perspective on how good the offense can be. So we need to see growth in that department. Nice to see, we've heard some good things about some of the wide receivers, like you said. Nice to hear about Logan Diggs. It looks like things are trending pretty well outside of the Jarrett Patterson news. And I know Jaden Thomas has been kind of limited to the bike.
Sure.
With the
That's my big concern there.
Yeah.
Like, love hearing what Jaden's done. Love that he was so good in the first practice. But in two of the last 3 or 4 media openings, he's been on the bike, not practicing. And they say it's like a minor, what did he say? Like
hamstring pull or something.
Yeah, but it's like some degree, which supposedly isn't that big of a deal. But the reality is that's a kid that needs reps, and he's not getting them. And when we talked about Jaden last week, what was the thing that I mentioned in the breakdown I read? It's just not healthy.
Yeah.
He hasn't played it, didn't play a full season in 2020, partly because of COVID, but he was battling turf toe all year. Didn't play a whole season in 2019 because I think it was a knee injury. I could be wrong on that. So it's like that's the big question mark with Jaden Thomas. Can he answer the bell every week? And they're going to need him to. They don't have the depth for him not to, because Deion Colsey's out right now with a knee strain. He should be back next week, I think, is from what I'm hearing. But they need to figure that out. I mean, they need to get him healthy. And this is, people were kind of saying some snarky things this summer, like, well, you guys talk about how talented this team is, but then you say Brian Kelly, wasn't doing a good job recruiting. This is it right here. I mean, this is the deal. The fact that there's still a gap between the 1 and the 2 at so many positions, and how you're just flat out thin at other positions, and you're counting on you need freshmen to step into so many other spots if there's an injury. That's the problem.
Yes.
And that's where Notre Dame is right now.
I think the premier programs, it's like if a freshman comes in and is a dude at Alabama, right? Like Alabama's going to play them because they have no problem with playing freshmen. But it's also, Brian, I mean, with the depth that they have, they don't need them to be the dude as freshmen. It's just the fact that they are. If a freshman's going to come into Notre Dame and be so good that he has to play, fantastic. But the simple fact is, if they're not that guy, you shouldn't have to depend on them right out of the bat, right? And that's, I mean, we've talked about the wide receiver room ad nauseum at this point. Like, you are a couple recruiting classes away from restoring the depth in that room, if we're being honest, from a numbers perspective. And that is a fault of the previous staff. It is. I mean, no matter what we want to say about it, that there is lack of depth at a couple different positions because of the previous staff. It's not that they were recruiting bad players. It's just that they weren't recruiting enough at certain spots more than anything.
Right. And because your previous receivers coach didn't know how to run a room, lead a room, if you've got Lawrence Keys on your roster right now, we're having a different conversation. If you never chased Xavier Watts off in the first place, we're having a different conversation. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this. I'm even talking about Jordan Johnson, who, that I don't put Jordan Johnson out entirely on Notre Dame. Jordan Johnson kind of acted in a way where, he left because of his own actions too. It's not all on Del Alexander. Lawrence Keys is flat out. He is. Kendall Abdur-Rahman is. Lawrence Keys is. Xavier Watts is. That's, Jay Brunel is. Those are all guys that could give you good depth right now. Some could play. Lawrence Keys can help you right now. Yeah. Right? You lose Avery Davis. Oh, that's a bummer. What are we going to do? Put Lawrence Keys in there. You know what I mean? Like, you're fine. Those are just the different things that you look at and you say, boy, man, Jay Brunel, maybe he's not playing this year, but, he could provide some depth. He could give you a good look. He could be a good player that could maybe step in and give you some snaps in the game. So those are the different things you look at and say, this is why we were so hard on him, is this right here. You know, where would Notre Dame be right now if they also still had C.J. Williams? Yeah, hey, you know what? C.J. got to throw him in the game. He's an advanced kid. He's not a burner. He's not dynamic, but he's an advanced kid that knows how to play the game of football.
He might be able to give you some slot reps right now.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And that's just kind of where you are. And that's the frustrating thing about this. All of this is, you shouldn't be in this situation. And that's what Marcus Freeman and his staff need to fix. Going back to recruiting is you got to get the numbers right. This is why are they taking this kid? They already, why are they taking the fifth receiver when they've already got four? Oh, this is why. This is it right here. Why are they going for a fifth defensive lineman when they've already got all these other guys? Well, this is it right there. You keep filling up. You keep going after talented players because you never know. You never know where you're going to be. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show, Ryan. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. We've started a few questions. We're going to go through and find some more to start. But you can throw more questions in as we go through this. But before we head to the mailbag, I want to remind you all to please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message board. I was actually encouraged last night, Ryan. We had some people that left the message board last night, a couple people that left by my choice, not theirs. When this stuff happens in the past at other places I've been, you always see a mass exodus after really big news happens, losses, big. We actually gained more subscribers yesterday than we lost. And this is after the Keon thing. So if you look at to now, we've gained more than we've lost, which says a lot about, I think, the community that we're building and people wanting to stick around and all that kind of stuff. So I was very happy to see that because I think I told you last night, we're going to have some people leave. That's just the way that it goes. And we had some, and I get it. It is what it is. But we've had more people sign up since then than we've had lose, which is I think a great sign. So we will get to questions here in a minute, but I want to thank all of y'all for that. We had some people freaking out a little bit last night, but there was also a lot of really good back and forth discussion on the board as well. And I'll be honest, the chat was a little better today than I anticipated. So I appreciate there was not a lot of people taking shots at Keon, which I respect and appreciate. And doesn't mean you have to be happy about it. Doesn't mean you have to think he did the right thing or whatever the case may be. But, I was happy to see how people handled it. So, but it is disappointing. I mean, I still remember Keon jumping in our chat when he committed, how excited he was, to be part of Notre Dame. And now you see him bail. It's a bummer, and we can be bummed, but Notre Dame will continue to power forward. And this recruiting class is still really, really good and will continue to grow and get better.
Yeah. Well, Brian doesn't like a lot of my actions, but he still loves me. So
that's not true. It's not true.
Which part?
Yeah. This is what the guy's talking about. Like say things that I'm going to have to respond to. It's like my son. I'm like, oh man, it's like Ryan's like my teenage son who's just saying things just to needle me.
I'm your 30-year-old son.
You're my 30-year-old son. Hey, some people have kids at 14. That might have been me. No, that would not have been me. Anyway, so before we go off the rails too much, thanks everybody for being a part of the first part of this show. So Ryan, let's move on to the mailbag. We had a lot of super chats. I want to get to those here. Obviously, some of them we can get to. I'd rather the light just be bright than for you to keep doing that. It's all good. It's all good, man. We'll figure it out. So we have a super chat from Brandon Plesner, and we have some other super chats related to the Keon and recruiting that we kind of held off till now. So we'll get to those now. Brandon, thank you so much for your super chat. Appreciate that. As Bama even had a recent history of DN development or NFL success besides players currently on their roster, I thought NFL development was a giant factor for Keon, and I can't think of anyone from Alabama. So as pure edge rushers, number one, it's still better than Notre Dame's. And the push that Notre Dame would be getting from how well things are going with Isaiah Foskey is somewhat negated by the fact that Will Anderson's going to get drafted even higher. Sure. But we've seen some Alabama guys go in the first couple rounds. And I mean, Jonathan Allen was not technically the same kind of kid as Keon Keeley, but he was still considered an end in their defense. And he was a first round pick, and the Alabama defense was the 3-4. He wasn't one of the edge guys. He was considered an end. And he was a first round pick. We've seen a lot of interior players. Where was Ryan Anderson drafted? Was he a first or second round pick?
Second round.
So we've seen some guys like that, but they haven't produced a ton of edge players. Was Dante Hightower's an off ball inside guy, correct?
He's an off ball. Other edges I can think of are Tim Williams was drafted in like the third round,
right?
I think,
but no first round picks.
No,
but they've produced. This is why I say, Brandon, because your point is spot on, Brandon. Mm-hmm. perception is reality, especially with young people. Like I was going to put something out last night, but I was like, you know what? This is going to come across the wrong way. But I went through and I went through from like, the Alabama recruiting classes and I went through like all the different guys they've landed and where those guys were picked. And, if you look from like 2010 to 2014, Bama's only signed, I think, 3 defensive ends, right, that were 5-star top 10 recruits. Deshaun Hand was a 4th-round pick. Is he even in the NFL still?
I think he's a backup somewhere. Okay. Yeah,
he's a 4th-round pick. He never panned out. Ben Davis is now at Texas. He won't get drafted.
Did he go out last year? He actually was in this draft and he went undrafted.
That was dumb. Yeah. That was dumb.
Well, I think he was a 5th-year guy, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
And then they got a Yabi Anoma, who was like one of the top. I think he was like one who had a number 1. He just transferred to Michigan.
Did you see that? He's literally been at Alabama, Houston. Then he went to
UT Martin,
and now he's at Michigan.
That's Michigan throwing the proverbial, baloney against the wall and hoping it sticks, Man. And that's who they've had at defensive end, and so you're correct, Brandon. They haven't had that. But the perception is Alabama produces more first-round picks than anybody else. And it's true. It just doesn't happen to be there. And they've produced a ton of first-round defensive linemen. Mm-hmm. It just hasn't been guys like him.
Sure.
And that's the thing to sell. But the sort of the negator that they have is the same one Notre Dame's trying to use. Well, I know we haven't had a first-round defensive end since, Ronaldo win in 1998, but we have Isaiah Foskey. Well, Alabama's like, I'll see your Isaiah Foskey and raise you Will Anderson. I always want to call him Tim Williams.
With a Dallas Turner waiting in the wings too. So,
right.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, Notre Dame can counter with a heck of a defensive end class of their own, but that's just the perception. The perception is one thing for Notre Dame and nothing for Alabama as far as edge players. But the overall perception is true. They do produce more first-round picks than Notre Dame by a wide margin. And that's something that Marcus Freeman's going to have to produce or fix, and he knows that. He talked about this when he was defensive coordinator. You remember that interview you did with Chris Zorich? He was talking about, look, we got to convince kids that they can come here and get a great education, that they can compete for a national championship, and that we can get them into the NFL and know that they got to be high picks. Start doing those things, and Notre Dame is going to start getting some of these kids. That's just a fact. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. So that's just kind of that's where that is, Brandon. But good question. Pedro, we brought this up earlier. I really appreciate you saying this. You said, thank you guys for this channel. You guys are good and great at what you good and great at what you guys do. I appreciate that. I'm just going to assume he meant good was in me, great as in you. We'll just go with that.
I was going to say, which one is which there?
I'll own that. I'll own that.
You're definitely the great one in that sequence, but
no sucking up. We've talked about this. All right, Alan Watson with a super chat. Great, good show as usual, guys. Question: is there any plans on doing any live game time shows? So, game time shows? No, we will not be going live during Notre Dame games. We'll have most of the staff will be at the game. I'll be at the road games. I've already got credentialed for Notre Dame's Ohio State. I've got credentialed for North Carolina, Navy. I'll be filling out my Syracuse credential request form here soon as well. But and then other guys are going to be there for road games. It's hard to do it. I don't know if I would enjoy doing that during the game, be worried about the chat and all that. And I just want to watch the game and evaluate. Plus we have work to do. I have a game observations to write. People have game, post game stories to do. We have content we have to produce. And the reality is YouTube is still our major revenue streams. If we're gonna get into the weeds, you guys know I'm honest to a degree with you guys. Honest to agree means some stuff I keep to myself, but I like to let you guys know what we do. Our revenue streams are the website, the irishbreakdown.com website, the YouTube channel, our podcast platform, and our message board. And right now, the YouTube channel is by far our lowest generator of revenue. And I don't know if it would be worth to take away from those other things to do an extra live show during the game. What we are going to do, Alan, is we're going to have a pregame show. So Sean Stiers and I were talking about that today. We'll have a pregame show from 10 to noon every game day, every Saturday. We'll preview the Notre Dame game first. Then we'll dive into the national games, the big national games. So we'll do that from 10 to 2. And then, of course, we'll have our post-game show, which this year is going to be more than just me and Vince. It's going to be me, Vince, Ryan, and Sean Davis. And sometimes, I may not be on till late because I'm driving back from a game, or, Ryan might not be on at Clemson week. I'm pretty sure Ryan may not be on the post-game show the entire time because he's going to be chasing down a million recruits, or he's going to be on the show, but he's going to be like this the whole time, like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. It was a great play, texting with recruits. So we want to try to provide more of a raw, I mean, we're going to always give analysis, but sort of a raw feel or just our gut reactions, big plays. And then Sunday night, Vince and I will still do the upon further review, which will be more technical, more of a breakdown. Because what we found last year, Ryan, was, and I don't know if I've talked about this on the show or not, but the post-game show and the upon further review are way too similar when it was just me and Vince. Because like, okay, well, we broke it down already kind of yesterday, and now we're breaking it down again and maybe notice a couple things, but it's not real different. And we felt like by getting the whole team involved in the post-game show that we could get more of a different viewpoints, a different reactions, who saw things differently. There'll be analysis and all those type of things, but it'll be a little bit more just bigger picture, different little aspects of the game. And then that way upon further review will allow us to kind of dive more into the weeds, the X's and O's, the analysis. And we're hoping to do a couple things a little bit differently with that this year. And so that's kind of where I want to be. So I think that's where we're moving with those. So,
and Alan, I'll say this real quick is that, we'll have representation at pretty much every game, right? So if you want to come just talk shop, come out to a game, man.
Like all the home games, like I'll be tailgating as of right now, if not all, most of the home games. We're definitely going to be tailgating for the Marshall game. My parents are going to be coming to town. My mom's going to be cooking up a big old spread for that. And then next week, Ryan will be in town the next week. And my parents,
no, I'll be in for Marshall.
You'll be at Marshall? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the next week, my parents are still going to be in town, but we're going to kind of cater that one a little bit. And then the plan is just kind of, have at least a get together. May not be a tailgate in traditional sense, but at least a get together. We have drinks, we hang out and talk ball and do all that kind of stuff at most of those games. So we'll also have a lot of that stuff too. And then that also makes it harder to do a live show because then I got to hustle back from the game and from the tailgate, get home and do all that kind of stuff. So and we can't play the game live, can't stream the game on YouTube because of copyright stuff. Right. So just to me, it's just not going to work, but we'll have plenty on game day. Trust me, plenty. And the nice thing too is in the past, like I remember the Virginia Tech game, we didn't get started on that post-game show till late because I had to walk 2 miles to the car and it took me forever to get back. Where now it's just like, hey, you guys get going now. 20 minutes after the game, get going now. I'll jump in when I get there. And because our staff is so much bigger and people that I trust and whose opinions I respect and trust, it gives me more freedom to say, hey, you guys got this. I'll get on when I can, knowing that there's still going to be great analysis and great observations and great community. And our staff all know each other. I mean, Sean Stiers is kind of new, but Sean Davis, Vince, Ryan, we've all hung out together. You guys have gotten to know each other. So I think it's going to make for a really, really great show. I'm very much looking forward to that. Very much looking forward to that. So very good question. Will Claw says, if we land Love and Lions plus quarterback and D-line and don't lose any commits, we will probably still finish ahead of Ohio State. Happy with 23 and losing Keon sucks. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. And I'll say this. I don't know if they'll finish higher ranked from a point standpoint than Ohio State, but if they land those guys and the quarterback one of the quarterbacks that I'm hearing a few different names. If they land one of the guys that I'm hearing and land just a good defensive lineman, I won't trade this recruiting class for Ohio State's regardless of where they're ranked.
Yes.
And that is absolutely something that I'll take to the bank because I wouldn't trade it right now. And it is still ranked ahead of Ohio State right now. So we'll see who closes the best. And that's going to be that was always going to be the key, Ryan. Can you close? Part of closing is hanging on to your commits. 100%. And the closing aspect for Notre Dame so far has been a little bit of hit and miss with this staff. Chancey Stuckey's done some really good things. Needed to close on Ronan Hannafin. He didn't, right? Okay, well, now he's got a chance to close on Tayshaun Lyons. Let's see if he can do it, right? Al Washington, done well in 2024. He got Boubacar, Devin Houston, but he couldn't close on Jason Moore, and he lost Keon Keeley. I mean, he'd lose him, but he did. I mean, he did. At the end of the day, he did. Yeah. So there's still work to be done. But when you're sitting here at number 3 with work to be done, it's a much better place than they used to be at. And that's the key for me. It's a much better.
I love the 2 parts that Will added in there at the end because this is something that we talked about earlier. We don't have to be too extreme either side, right? You'd be happy with 23 in this situation, but it also sucks that Keon's out, right? Like that's perfect. Well, in my opinion, is that you hit both sides of it. It's still really good, but Keon's out, so it stinks.
Yeah,
Sure.
it does. It sucks because and I know people don't want to hear this and they don't think it's true because he went back on his word. No, I mean, I get all that. But look, Keon's a good kid. I like Keon. I do. He's a good kid. And if you knew the struggle he's having right now, I think you'd understand how challenging this can be when you've got different people pulling you in different directions. He's a 17-year-old who's got this person saying, no, Keon, this is what's best for you. No, this is what's best for you. And he's trying to weigh all that while Nick Saban's calling him and Ryan Day is calling him and Marcus Freeman's calling him and all that kind of stuff. It sucks to lose a kid like that because I do think he's a great fit for Notre Dame. I don't think he realizes that anymore. Or maybe it's just not as important to him anymore, and that's why because if it was, he'd still be in the class, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. If he still valued that, that's kind of where he would be. So thank you for the super chat. Thank you for William Chesney for that super chat as well. He says Brian Rye might have jumped the gun when talking gap closing with Alabama, not sold on their 2 quarterback recruits. Think we out-recruited them at O-line, linebacker, receiver, and tight end. Class top to bottom, we are right there, beat OSU. And because Will was kind of saying this isn't a gap closing class, and I appreciate this sentiment, Will, and I definitely think the super chat. But look, Bama's not doing anything now that they haven't always done. And this is my point. Like Bama's not like one of the things Will had said. He was like, they're pulling away from it. No, they're not. If anything, the rest of college football has been slowly catching up to Alabama to a degree. Yeah. Georgia has caught them to a degree. Right. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about it. I still don't think they beat Bama if the injuries happen, but it would have been a close game. They're competitive with Bama.
Sure.
Clemson's beat them a couple times. There's other, A&M beat them last year. I mean, I think Notre Dame is slowly closing the gap on them. I just want to speed up the gap closing process, but Alabama's here and it's just, Notre Dame's kind of slowly working their way up. And a guy like Keon Keeley jumps that sucker up a little bit. And Dante Moore does as well. But if you look at their classes, class for class, Alabama's got some really highly ranked kids that I would love to. I mean, Caleb Downs is a dude. Yes. He is a top 5 player in the country for me. And Ryan, I think you and I are on the same page on that. But their offensive line class is incredibly overrated. That big 6'8" kid, and I'm trying to remember where he's from.
The kid they just got, right, recently?
It was 2 kids ago. Yeah, like they've gotten 2 linemen lately. One of them's okay, but they got a kid who is in the top 100. And when I watched that kid play, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is not a top 100 offensive lineman. He is from Alabama. His name is Wilkin Formby. And, he's ranked number 80 overall by Rivals. Watch his film. You all tell me if you agree or disagree with me. And I'm like, nope, don't see it. He's a big kid who just pushes around inferior high school competition, but he doesn't have good feet. He's stiff and he plays really high.
Yeah.
And it's not because his technique is bad. He can't bend, Ryan.
Yeah.
And, a guy like, Boubacar Traore is going to eat him alive at the next level with his length and his power. Josh Burnham is going to do that. Tyson Ford's going to do that. So they've got some overrated guys too. But, Bama's not done either. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, Notre Dame, you may like a position now, but Bama's not done. They're going to keep adding kids. But like you said, though, Notre Dame's receiver class, incredibly better than Alabama's right now. I'll take Cooper Flanagan over Ty Gatewood every day of the week, and I don't care what Ty Lockwood's ranking is. Ty Lockwood's ranked higher than Cooper Flanagan. You can't watch his film and tell me he's a better prospect than Cooper Flanagan.
Agree with you.
You just can't.
That was the one thing about the Ohio State thing is that they lost that kid, but then they got the other kid that I thought was actually better than the other kid than they got.
Yeah, I think Jelani Thurman's a better prospect than Ty Lock. And Jelani is a little overrated he's not a top 100 guy yet, but he has a chance to be. Sure. He's a real raw kid. He's got a lot he's got to fill out his body. He's got to do this, but the tools are impressive. When I look at Ty Lockwood, I'm thinking he's stiff. He's a throwback tight end for me. Not real fast, a little tight, strong kid. But for a strong kid, supposedly strong kid as a blocker, he doesn't really break a lot of tackles. Yeah. So I'm not impressed. That was a head scratcher for me. Great running back class. No doubt. Linebacker class, not even close. And, right now their D-line class has 2 guys in it. They'll get Keon. So, Notre Dame's behind them because of their secondary class and their running back class because some of those guys are ranked really high. But, for example, there's nobody in Notre Dame's class better than Caleb Downs. But with all due respect, Jaleel Hurley and Tony Mitchell, very good players. I think Notre Dame has DBs as good, if not better than them, for me. And Notre Dame's best DB, Peyton Bowen, isn't that far behind Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs is the best safety and the best defensive back in the country on my ranking. I think I have him ahead of Cormani McClain. He's definitely the number one safety. But Peyton Bowen's a top 30 player on my board.
From a talent perspective, you can have a conversation. It's just that, Downs is more advanced right now, obviously.
Sure. Oh, that's a good point. That's because Downs can step on the field right now and play.
Yes.
From a technical, physical, and athletic standpoint. Peyton can step on and play from an athletic standpoint, but he's still got a lot to learn about the position.
Exactly.
But you are correct. We've said this before. If Peyton Bowen reaches his potential, he's as good as any safety in the class. And we said that when we thought Notre Dame had a shot at Caleb Downs. But Caleb Downs right now, best safety in the country. But one of the best safeties, I would argue, you could make a case he's the best safety prospect since Kyle Hamilton in 2019. I think you can make that case. It's debatable, but you can make that case. So to me, it's Bama's ranking is high because of they have some guys that are overrated. Have you seen Jaleel Hurley? Nice player. I don't think he's a top 100 guy. He's not a guy that I think is necessarily better than some of the guys Notre Dame has.
I saw Tony Mitchell. He's okay.
He's good. He's a bottom of the top 100 kind of guy for me. Good player. But Notre Dame can compete with him. The quarterback one is one I'll disagree with you a little bit on, William. I'm with you on Eli Holstein. I actually like Dylan Lonergan. I do. I think he's very talented. He's got a big arm, big live arm. He's an athletic kid. I actually like him. The problem is from everything I've heard and been told, he's probably not going to play college football. He's probably going to be a high NFL draft pick. So if you're left with Eli Holstein as your quarterback, I used to like Eli a lot. He has gone way down in my evaluation. He's not evolved.
Physical tools.
He's got a big arm, but he tests athletically well. He doesn't play like a good athlete. He plays like a stiff who, and his mechanics are bad. His feel for the game is not good. He's got a bazooka though. But there's a lot of red flags about Eli Holstein, which is why he's not in my top 100. But I had Dylan Lonergan, I think, in my top 50. I actually think he's really talented.
That reminds me a little bit. You know what name I came across the other day that was in a similar thing? Really talented quarterback recruit that never played because of baseball. You remember Bubba Starling?
Oh yeah, Notre Dame recruited him.
Yeah.
Notre Dame thought they had a shot to get him for a while.
Yeah.
So
he was talented, man. Baseball career did not turn out for him either, but yeah.
Yeah. Yep. There's no doubt. So we will see. We will see kind of how that pans out. But the other thing too is, like I said, there's still guys they're going to get. If they get Keon Keeley, then they just got the best player in the country. But that's what Bama does. Now it's about Notre Dame upping their game, and that's what they're going to need to do, in my opinion. Got another super chat down here from Sean S. Sean with super chat. Thank you, Sean. When will the IB staff be comfortable predicting the Ohio State score? Curious to hear your thoughts. No, we're still a ways out. Thanks again for all you guys do. So we're still in the process of kind of changing up, or at least rethinking our format for our in-season shows. And I would love to hear feedback on, if you want to hit me up on DM on Twitter or on the message board, but we're thinking about mixing things up a little bit and maybe making the mailbag be Thursday night, since Vince loves mailbag so much. Have him and Sean Stiers do the Thursday night mailbag. Since we're going to do mailbags after every show this year, which we didn't do last year, then the main mailbag might be Thursday night with Vince and Sean, and then making Friday a prediction show. Because we were doing it on Thursday before. But at the very latest, we'll do it the Thursday or Friday before the Ohio State game. We may do something sort of the week before, and then we can just stick to the analysis the rest of the week. So, but I would imagine, Sean, that I'm going to want to wait until we get to game week before I'm going to want to give you a score. So there's still a lot of film I want to watch and news that has to happen. Who's going to win this job at Ohio State? Where the injury is going to be like, those type of things. So still a little bit of a ways away from that. Patrick Tolan says, I can't believe we have to say this. Thank you for your super chat, Patrick. But if you're tweeting or making negative comments to these teenagers on social media, you're the problem. Yes. I agree. I want to make a statement about this. If you want to come to the message board and vent your frustrations about a recruit, I'm totally good with that. That's partly why we have a message board and why it's premium. We want you to have some level of, okay, I have a shield around me. I can kind of say what I want to say within reason of what we do. What I have an issue with is people tweeting at them or responding at them and those kind of things, trying to slide into their DMs. Now, I've tried to tell kids, lock your Twitter account so only the people that you want to see it and the only people that can reach you and and then just don't look at your notifications. close your inbox. Only let people that you follow, do that. I mean, there's ways you can avoid that stuff. But to a teenager, this is what they know. For me, it's easy because I wouldn't have Twitter if it wasn't my job, right? And you and I have talked about it. I hate Twitter. And I'm only on there because it helps the business to a degree. Sure. But I hate Twitter. I despise it in so many different ways. But yes, it's not appropriate. People say, well, these kids are making six figures. I don't care. Like that, someone making money doesn't mean that they're open to you saying ignorant things. Now, there's a level of criticism that these young people need to be willing to accept. Like you can't want to be in the spotlight that then get you NIL money, but then say, but you can't disagree with my decision. I'm okay with people disagreeing with his decision. I'm okay with people disagreeing with the way he went about making his decision. But there's legitimate criticism, and then there's being an ignorant person.
Personal attacks.
Yes, right. And that's the issue. And it's just never smart to tweet at recruits. It's like, why? Why are grown? You know what I mean? Like it's just not appropriate. But there's a place and a time where it's okay to say, hey, this is a bad move, I think, by Keon. And I think so. I love Keon. I think he's such a great kid. I think he's a great player. I think he made the wrong decision. Because I think he made the wrong decision because I don't think this is ultimately what he wants. I believe that to my core. I think that this is something that he's doing for others. That's my opinion. I'm not telling you what he's told me. This is my opinion of reading all the stuff that I know. Like reading between the lines and taking things that I've been told and he said and saying, I don't think this is what he wants to do. At the end of the day, he's still responsible for his decision. Same with Dante Moore. Dante Moore picking Oregon was about his appeasing those around him, not doing what I think he wanted to do. At the end of the day, that's on you. It's your life. You've got to either, CJ Carr, his dad didn't want him to commit either for different reasons. But CJ said, no, this is what I want to do. And his dad supported it, right? I mean, now, if CJ would have just followed along to what his dad wanted, he'd probably still be uncommitted. And I want to be clear on that. It's not that his dad had any issue with Notre Dame. His dad just wanted to make sure that he went through the process and made the right decision. And
which is that's good parenting.
Exactly.
That is good.
Exactly.
Parenting. He's not looking for a handout. He's not looking for his own personal, payoff
or school he wants him to go to. Right.
Yeah, he's trying to make a good personal decision for him. And Patrick, I love that you had to say. I hate that you have to say it, but I love that you did say it because I think the one word that I always come back to is empathy. Right. And there's a difference between disagreements and a personal attack to Brian's opinion, Brian's point, excuse me. And I would say this is just kind of put yourselves in their shoes for a second, right? Keon just made a tough decision. Now you have people that are cursing at you, calling you a scum, calling you, this name, that name. And just imagine yourself in that shoe. Would you appreciate that? I personally wouldn't. I think that's way across the line.
The thing that sucks too, however, is there are fans of Alabama that have created new Twitter profiles and say things ignorantly to him and pretend to be Notre Dame fans. That's also a fact. And I tweeted about that a few days ago too. If you're a recruit and you see something, look at the Twitter profile. If there's no photo or you see the person created their account in August of 2022, hey, guess what, bro? That's not some Notre Dame fan who has had it enough and he just created an account yesterday so he can come on Twitter and bash you. That's some Alabama fan trying to make Notre Dame fans look bad. It's both. And that's the thing is it just sucks that we have to have this conversation because adults should not act like that. But this is also the real world and people act certain ways. But what I tried to tell a couple recruits is the problem that I have on the recruits is don't start thinking like young people I have found think Twitter is the real world. And like I said, it's not. Like the vast majority of Notre Dame fans I know aren't on Twitter. Or if they are, they just read. They don't post. We have thousands of members on our message board. We probably have consistently maybe what, Ryan? 100 to 200 people that regularly post. Maybe. Yeah. Right? And so like most people are they're observers. Twitter's the same way. And then you consider how few people are actually on Twitter. And most fans aren't that way. Most fans are not going to say this to you. So don't assume that because these small number of idiots that's how most fans are. Because most Notre Dame fans are exactly where we are. I'm pissed. I'm disappointed. I'm bummed, whatever. but I'm not going to go bash the kid because he's still a kid.
Yeah.
It's just, so don't sit there like Notre Dame fans are this. No, most Notre Dame fans are awesome.
Yes.
It's just there's the small vocal minority morons who make everybody else look bad. And that's the problem. And that's what I've tried to express to a couple kids. Like, look, don't come at me with like Notre Dame fans are this, because they're not. I know Notre Dame fans. I know them. I know, and most of them are not that way. Twitter is not real life. I'm going to keep saying this. Twitter's not real life. It's just not. So next question we have here from, we have a super chat from Brandon. Here, another super chat. Besides Aiden Gobira and Josh Burnham, who on the roster are the Vipers for next season that can make an impact? Is there anyone, Keon and Pemba, another talented target, seem to have a good chance for year one playing time? Well, I think Mpemba could. And the one thing we haven't talked a lot about, Ryan, is I don't think Notre Dame's getting Samuel Mpemba, because I do think Samuel Mpemba is one of those players who he is kind of looking for to take advantage of NIL.
Yeah.
And again, I don't have a problem with that. Like, if that's your priority, that's your priority. He's been honest about it. And it's not a negative thing. NIL deals are out there to be had. Some kids care about that, some don't.
And it's only going to get worse, sir.
Right.
If you didn't see the whole news with Malachi Nelson today, it's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
But so I right now I don't see that one. I think Notre Dame is in it. I think Samuel is still listening to Notre Dame. Notre Dame has an NIL pitch to him. But I do think Keon not being in the class does move the needle a little bit for you with Samuel Mpemba, because now you can recruit him to play Viper.
Yeah, which he prefers. Every time that he talks, they ask him, "What do you see yourself as an edge?" I'd like to rush the quarterback. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah, and that's now you can sell that, and you're not having to compete with Keon for playing time.
Right.
So that's just kind of the reality of that. So, all right, so we got some Vipers. So I mean, I think Burnham and Gobira. Look, you could, if the numbers are right, you could maybe bring back Osita Ekwonu next year as a guy that could provide some depth. I think there's some other linebackers that could maybe emerge. Like, let's just say hypothetically you feel you need another guy. Jordan Patelho is one, especially if Jalen Sneed steps up. We got a question about Jalen Sneed here in a little bit that we'll get to from John A1. I think if Jalen Sneed steps up, that's more and more opportunity for you to play Jordan Patelho coming off the edge, where I think he's really dangerous. Junior Tuihalamaka can do some things. I think I talked about this when he signed. He's a guy that, if he outgrows Mike linebacker, or if somebody else beats him out at Mike linebacker, he's a guy that could maybe help you a little bit at Viper. And so there's options there, Brandon. There's definitely options there. But I really think that this year is going to be big for Josh Burnham and Aiden Gobira. Not so much that they have to play this year because, other things, but really they got to develop to put themselves in that position. The other thing I would do if I'm Notre Dame, I'm already going to start talking to Justin Adamiola about coming back for a sixth year. I don't know if he's going to want to do that. But I'm like, look, man, Isaiah's gone, right? Like,
the dude.
You could be that dude. Yeah. I don't know how much coming back for a sixth year boosts his draft stock. That's the only problem, especially if he has a good year this year. But you never know.
It may not. I mean, he doesn't have tremendous traits, so it may not hurt him either to go back for another year. So it might be one of those things where it's just it's whatever you want to do. It's like a personal choice.
And can the production help overcome maybe the lack of some of the traits that people look for? Yeah, he may not be this, and this, but I'm taking him in round 4 because here's what I know about the dude. He gets to the flipping quarterback. Because is that not like the biggest? If you're talking about a defensive recruit, a defensive player, like what's the one thing that NFL teams look for? Can you get to the quarterback? I'll overlook.
Can you affect the quarterback?
I'll overlook a lot of other stuff if you can get to the quarterback.
Yep.
So I think that's something that I would do too. They'll have options. They'll have players. But if you've got a trio of edge rushers of Viper next year named Josh Burnham, Jordan Patelho, and Aiden Gobira, I'm not super worried about Notre Dame being able to find production.
Some good athletes. Some good athletes.
It was very long. Very, very long. All right. So, Ryan, let's get to this question here from David Carpenter. He has a 2-part question. He goes, if I was where Ryan was last night, but now that's over, ready for the season start. Keon Keeley was projected as a Viper, right? If so, do you think we look for an exact replacement or go for the best player and slot another player into that position? It's a really good question, David. My understanding is maybe both, Ryan. I think what I think Notre Dame was perfectly fine bringing in 4 defensive linemen. When they offered Blake Purchase and Caleb Herring, that was legitimately a potential 5th defensive lineman. But at the time, they were not leaning to a 5th defensive lineman. I think now they are, because you're kind of hoping that you can get 2 kids that have some high ceilings and then one of them pans out, like we've seen from Notre Dame. Isaiah. Reminder to people, Isaiah Foskey was ranked as a top 200 recruit by no one. Well, none of the major recruiting services. Adi Takumba Ogundeji was ranked as a 3-star recruit, rightfully so. He was a raw player coming out of high school, but the talent was there. And then he developed into a 5th-round NFL draft pick. It's a big end. So I think if I'm Notre Dame, from some of the things I've gathered, I think that 5 might be the new goal now, because you kind of like, you're not just going to get one guy to replace Keon. If you can get a couple guys, then all of a sudden you've now helped your depth a little bit. I do think they would like to find someone who can play Viper, but I think there's some other options they could have at that position as well. I've heard people talk about how they like Preston Zinter as a potential Viper. I don't see that just yet. I mean, I'd want to see him play linebacker. I don't know if I love the length that much, but I do know some people that evaluate to say I could see that kid being a Viper. I don't see that. Yeah. But there are some that see that. So I think right now, David, I'd say they probably do a little bit of both. Just get one kid who I think just get the 2 best kids you can get, and then figure that part out later.
Well, I would say, I mean, to that point, and it's a great question, David, and I'm not quite sure you were where I was last night. I was in a little bit of a dark place, but that's another conversation for another day.
I had to talk Ryan off the ledge a little bit last night. There's no doubt.
But I'll say this, Brian, we were talking about this a little bit actually before the show. It's like, if you get a really good other defensive end in the 2023 class, and maybe they are more projectable to a big end, do you toy with like a Boubacar Traore as your Viper, who's a different style? He's not like the flexible dude, but could be a power guy, kind of like how Isaiah Foskey is, right? Like that's the thing about Isaiah Foskey. Isaiah Foskey is a very explosive athlete linearly, but he's not like the loosest edge guy of all time. Like, he's a power converter with incredible length. So I wouldn't discount that maybe they just go for a different type at Viper comparative to what maybe they were going to go as.
Right. Maybe you go away from the guy that drops. And maybe you have and this is where I would be very curious to see Al Golden's influence. Do you try to focus more on being a situational defense? We're going to go get a Blake Purchase, hypothetically, not to be a full 4 down, or 3 down defensive player, meaning first, second, and third down, not to be a base defensive player, but we like this kid because he's a really good nickel package, or when we're playing an air raid team that throws the ball all the time. Like, this is a kid that we really like because he can rush the quarterback, he can drop into coverage, he gives us some flexibility, but he's not a guy that we're necessarily going to be the Viper in every game. And maybe there's another guy that you say, hey, look, we like this guy because against Stanford and some other teams, this kid's a big physical kid that can shut down the run from the Viper and can rush the quarterback. He just can't drop into coverage a lick. So, there's other games where that guy may be fine. I'm curious to see if we see that, because that's what the NFL is now, Ryan. I mean,
yes,
the NFL is a sub-package league on defense. Now, you want guys can play every down, but there's value to those other type of guys. And I think that's kind of where I think you're going to see them also look is to Ryan's point, is maybe a guy doesn't have to be able to do everything now, and say, if you have Boubacar playing Viper, guess what you're doing? You're not dropping him into coverage. You're bringing him off the edge. And so then maybe your message to Matt Balis for him is like, look, we think this kid has a huge frame, but let's focus on keeping him a little thinner. Let's not let him get past 270, 265, 270, and make sure we're working on his explosiveness and his bend and his twitch and his change of direction, as opposed to really bulking him up to be a 290-pound big end or 3 technique.
Yeah.
We're just throwing this out there as just things to think about. So there are some options, David, but I do think one thing we can believe in is I do think there's a much better chance of going out to 5 than they would have done before at this point in time.
And I would also like to add to your point, Brian, of like, if a Boubacar is more of a Viper or whatever, Yeah, you're not going to ask them to drop as much, but there are also things that those styles do give to you, though, right? Like you can be a little more creative in the run game. Maybe you play a 6 where you're head up on tight ends a little more. Maybe you play a 7. Maybe your defensive ends at that point become a little bit more interchangeable, where like you don't have to flip sides because they're kind of more similar type football players. So there is a lot of options to Brian's
Right.
point. Like I don't think this is a one answer is the only answer. Like there's a couple ways that Notre Dame can kind of
Right.
tackle this, and I think it'll be okay in a couple different ways.
Right. Some really good question. We got some more here. Matt 211 GT. Thank you for the super chat, Matt. Any recent communication with Bowen? Oh, wait, never mind. Just read your post on the board. Sign up, folks. I appreciate that plug, Matt. Thank you very, very much. But we do have some intel on the board. It's nothing like earth shattering. Just kind of here's the latest on Jeremiah Love and Peyton Bowen and the quarterback recruiting. So it's not like, oh my God, everybody get off the show right now and run over to the message board. But it's good intel, and it gives you the latest of where things are going, including where the communication is between Peyton Bowen and the rest of the commits and the staff, which was a sign in the last week that that's where things are going with Keon Keeley, was that communication was not there. So we have an update on that as well. So thank you very much for that super chat. Matt, we got some more questions up here. David Fryman says, how is Jaden Thomas coming along? I was excited to see him get a go this season. When he's on the field, David, he's been really good from what we've seen. What we've seen and then what we've heard. It's been really good to the point where if he can stay healthy, I'd be shocked if he's not getting starter snaps this season by the end of the season, right? If not earlier. By the end means, so just so you know what I mean when I say end of the season, it doesn't mean by the 12th game. It just means at some point in time before the season ends, I could see him doing that, but he's got to stay on the field. That was an issue for him in high school. It's been an issue for him since he's got to Notre Dame. He's got to be able to stay on the field. And again, it's not like he's punking out. He's got to stay healthy. It's just whether it's got to stretch better. I don't know what it is, but they got to figure something out because they need that kid to stay healthy, Ryan. They need him to stay healthy.
100%. Especially now. I mean, we talked about the numbers, right? Like they need Jaden Thomas. It went from, I think it went more from Jaden Thomas is a little bit of an enigma to me. And it's like, oh man, if he breaks out, that's really nice, to now kind of being a necessity, right? Like you really do need him, in my opinion. And he's a versatile player. So I really do I hope that he's able to find, I mean, because some guys do get over that stuff, right? Like, I mean, whether it is a ritual thing of stretching more or a different variation of stretching, it can get better. So I'm hoping, man, because they're going to need it. Certainly are.
Right. Savage Science Fitness with another receiver question. I thought I heard that Joe Wilkins will be back as well for our Whiteouts week 1. That is what they're hoping for, but based on the video I saw from practice yesterday, he is not there yet. I mean, he's not there yet. He doesn't have that burst off his foot right now, and Joe Wilkins cannot afford to play if he's not 100%. I mean, he's not athletic enough without that. But there's still over 2 weeks left, so we shall see. But it'd be nice if he could come back, but I don't think Joe in week 1 is going to be the difference between beating or losing Ohio State, just because of where I think he probably is right now as development. Maybe down the road it's more, but I don't know if it'll be there in week 1, if that makes sense. Ryan Thidoff says, Ryan and Ryan, the new Big Ten TV deal has their games at noon on Fox, 3:30 on CBS, and prime time for NBC. Does this guarantee 0 Notre Dame home night games, even if Notre Dame renews with NBC? I would imagine that there will be some language built into the Notre Dame contract to allow them to have night games. Also, you kind of look at the schedule, and there's going to be games against Big Ten teams moving forward. Which I would imagine that they're going to would want to turn into night games when either way, whether Notre Dame's home or away, but especially when they're home, since that's kind of what we're referring to. So I don't know. I don't think it's a guarantee that Notre Dame's going to renew with NBC. I don't think it's a guarantee that they'll have night games. I don't know. I really don't know how that's going to be, but I would imagine Notre Dame will want to have that in their contract.
If Notre Dame is playing a Big Ten team and they don't make that a night game, that's pretty misguided on the Big Ten's point of view.
Correct.
The network's point of view, I should say. Very misguided.
Right.
Yep.
So we'll see how it goes. But I don't know the specific language of the contract with NBC to know what the options are from the Big Ten standpoint or Notre Dame's. So that'll have to be a detail that'll be worked out at this point in time. So from John A1, if Jalen Snead steps up enough to earn a role at Viper, with Kaiser, does Botelho get back in at Viper? Would Adamiola move between Viper and Big N? How important is it for Botelho to establish before 2023? Yes to all of that. Botelho has been getting work with the Vipers as well as Rover, just like Josh Burnham is still getting some work at, I believe, Will. I think Will is where I heard he's getting some work as well as Viper, just to find a way to, look, we got to get this kid on the field some way, somehow. So he's getting cross-trained work. Justin Adamil has always been a guy that's going to play both sides of the end. He's done that in the past. We've talked about that. He's definitely a guy that will do both. And it is incredibly important for Jordan Botelho to be able to somewhat establish before next year, because it may be a situation where you like Josh Burnham and Aiden Gobira going into next year, but are you ready for them to become the starters? Maybe not. Jack Kaiser's got another year left after this. If Jalen Sneed steps up and you feel really good about that 1-2 punch of Rover, hey, Jordan, he's already over 250. Yeah. So, put him at Viper, and now you've got him, Botelho, and Gobira at Viper. Okay. Would I want Keon Keeley on my roster? Heck to the yes. Right? But am I thinking, oh, gee, Notre Dame can't compete for a title in 23 because of their Vipers in that situation? Heck to the no. You know what I mean? Like, they still can.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, like, D-line has not been the thing holding Notre Dame back. It hasn't. Their last two starting Vipers got drafted 3rd and 5th round. Their current Viper is going to be a 1st-round pick, most likely. Right? Like, Viper, again, there's the Keon conversation, and then there's evaluating Notre Dame at Viper independent of whatever happened with Keon, and that's not the issue.
Yeah.
Keon changes things dramatically, but it's not like you're, oh, gee, we don't know if we can beat teams with what we have now. It's not that either. It's not that either.
Keon Keeley was going to make a strength a bigger strength. Like that's the point.
Much better strength. Yes, agree.
And I would say this too, John. If Botelho can, if he finds a home at Viper long term and he's able to really scratch the surface of how good he can be, then it's not as big a drop off as you might think going from an Isaiah Foskey to a Jordan Botelho, in my opinion, just from a pure athleticism perspective. It's going to look different, but I think Botelho's got big time upside. Yeah. I really do. If it hits, it has to hit, but that's the unknown, but he's very talented.
Well, if he makes that move, he'd have 23 and potentially 24.
Yeah.
But whether he's a starter or not, you've got he's in the 2020 class. Mm-hmm. So his freshman year doesn't count. So he could have 24. I don't know if he'll be in position to be brought back for a 5th year. I have no clue. Mm-hmm. But let's just say, just for next year, between him, Josh Burnham, and Aiden Gobira, you have a very twitchy, long, athletic group of guys. Are any of them ready to be a 60-snap-a-game guy? Don't know. Yeah. Does it matter? No. I mean, that's the thing, is you're just throwing waves of long athletes at those guys. What's Aiden? Because by the time we get to next fall, Aiden Gobira will be going into his 4th semester at Notre Dame. Think about that.
That's crazy.
Josh Burnham will be going into his 4th semester at Notre Dame because they were both early enrollees. So, again, I would love Keon to be in this class. This isn't one of those deals where, screw it, they're fine. No, I want it all. I mean, this is like last year, like, oh, they're fine because in the secondary because – without Devin Moore because they got Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey. Yeah, okay, I get that. Those guys are both dudes. But wouldn't you rather have both of those dudes and Devin Moore?
Yes.
That's always got to be the answer. Is Notre Dame going to be okay at Viper? Heck yes. Would they be even better if they had Keon? Heck yes. And that's what I talk about, Ryan, is being able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. Is that right there? That's kind of where I'm at.
I'm interested to see in Burnham and Gobira's weight gain from year 1 to year 2 too. They're both like 230 something, right? But they're both super long. Like I mean, at least one of them is going to be like 250 by next year, I would say.
I think they both will be. Yeah. I think Burnham probably maxes out around 250-ish.
Yeah.
I think Gobira could be 260 when it's all said and done. And he's so long. Because if he's 230 right now, if you've seen videos of him, Ryan, we've seen some pictures of him. If he's 230 right now, he's going to be huge because he is skinny. So if he's already carrying 230 pounds, boy, he's got a lot of room to add mass to that body. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of look at it and I'm thinking, okay, if he's 230 now, this is gonna be fun watching him develop Whereas I think Josh has a lot of room to grow, but there's a cap of 250, 255 that I don't necessarily want to go past with Josh Burnham.
I also don't want to sacrifice his athleticism.
Exactly.
And
that's exactly why.
Him as that Viper type, like he's more like the big Sam that he's going to rush the passer, but also we can drop him into space.
You can do he is the perfect guy for what they tried to do with the Viper last year. Where like one snap he's coming off the edge, the next snap he's lining up right over the center as a Mike linebacker. I mean, they were doing that with Keon or with Isaiah Foskey last year. Like that's not Isaiah's game. You know who would be great at that? Josh Burnham and Jordan Botelho.
I was looking on PFF the other day just for like the snap count stuff. I know, just for the snap count stuff. They had Isaiah Foskey so they had him as a stacked backer 79 times last year. I was really surprised that number was that high.
A lot of those were on third down. And he rushed from those at times. They'd move him around and rush him from times. But it was
they were doing like that 3-3 stacked look and
didn't love that. Didn't love that, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. Didn't love that. We got some more. We got a couple here on Peyton Bowen, so we'll bring those up as well. Actually, we have I think two on him. We didn't start another one. What is the status of Peyton Bowen? 24/7 composite bumped him up to a 5-star. Also, I've heard with Bowen's I've heard both Bowens were instrumental in recruiting Christian Gray. And then Mr. 2.0 says, am I naive to be feeling good about keeping Peyton Bowen? I'm getting vibes from the family that they're pro Notre Dame, and I'm wondering if the visits are more for Eli. So we have definitely talked about this before.
Yes.
And I can assure you that the theories that we have placed about some of these visits being more about Eli than Peyton have been confirmed by multiple people that are not at Notre Dame. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, Ryan, is, but he still keeps going on visits and posting tweets from this. And this whole stuff about, him maybe flipping to Oklahoma or Texas, that's coming from somewhere.
Sure.
So I understand why there's a lot of hesitation here. I do not think the circumstances are the same with Keon and Peyton. And the reason I say that is because with Keon, he was very upfront with Notre Dame about looking around. Peyton has been very upfront with Notre Dame about, this isn't me. This is me supporting Eli. I'm not interested in Oklahoma. I'm not interested in him. Now, that is countered by words he has given to other reporters about that. So it's been one of the weirdest circumstances, because what we hear behind the scenes and then what he says oftentimes are two different things. Now, I've been told some things about why he says those things that it's like, okay, well, I'll believe it when I see it type of scenario. But from everything we have been told, that is, Peyton Bowen has never wavered to Notre Dame commits or to Notre Dame coaches about where he's going. I think, and I've said this before, if that's accurate, I'm going to have a lot of very interesting things to say about On3 and 247 when this whole thing is done.
Yeah.
And about the role that they played with Keon, that the role they've tried to play with Jeremiah Love, the role they've tried to play with Peyton Bowen, to where we're moving away from people reporting the news and into a really dangerous world of some people trying to make news or manipulate things in a direction that would then be good for them. And I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I want to see what happens with Peyton and some of these other people, right? But from what I've been told, Ryan, you've heard the same thing. When you talk to commits, he still plays video games with them. He's in the group chat with them. Keon started to slowly kind of pull back a little bit.
Yeah.
Peyton has never done that. Never. Even when he was doing all those visits, he's never done that. And you are correct. He was very instrumental in recruiting Christian Gray. Very. He was instrumental in. I've had some people tell me he even played a role in Dylan Edwards, although I'm not sure about that one as strongly. But he has definitely been involved with commits. I mean, talk to Jaden Alsbury. He'll talk about Peyton Bowen.
Yep.
So, but again, there are things that make me say, okay, that sounds great. But then he'll give an interview where it's like, I've got a decision to make. And you're like, what decision do you have to make? Right. It's a strange thing. But the difference between Peyton and Keon. Okay. So Keon doesn't talk to the media. So there's no way to misconstrue what Keon says because he doesn't really talk to the media, not in a way that he wants it to get it out there. And so a lot of the stuff about Keon was just from behind the scenes. Well, there's a lot of that with Peyton. And you know what coaches are telling people. There's a lot of that with Peyton, but then Peyton's got some public comments that are like, okay, that doesn't track with what you're saying, you know, here or whatever. And I don't know why he's doing that. I don't want to presume to know why he's doing that. But I think that's what makes it different. But the other difference, Ryan, is that in Keon's sphere, he has a head coach who doesn't really care about recruiting other than he's more of a, you know, if you need my help, I'll give it. I'll give you my advice. But he's not like, you're not using Coach Chow to convince a kid to go somewhere. Good luck with that. You know what I mean? That's not going to end well for you. You know, and I have a great deal of respect for him. He's like, my job is Tampa Berkeley Prep high school coach. Help my kids the best they can, but there's no agenda there, in my opinion, with him. But there are some other people around Keon that are not pro Notre Dame. And it used to be that everybody around him was pro Notre Dame, but the pro Notre Dame voices have either been silenced or they have changed. And that's what's hurting him. If you look at Peyton, as of today, every influential person in his life that we are aware of is still very pro Notre Dame.
Agree.
And so there's just different circumstances. That's what makes him different from Dante. So we can't throw all these kids in the same category. Having said that, I would advise you not to go attacking people that are saying that that he's going to go somewhere else or they're worried about somewhere else as far as Notre Dame fans, because they said the same thing about, you know, Keon, you know, a couple weeks ago or a month ago. So, but I understand why some people are nervous about Peyton, but I also understand why people think he's going to end up at Notre Dame, because that's literally every bit of intel. Like Ryan and I will talk and we'll hear some report. So like we get sent the same stuff. We have people in our lives that, like, no matter what's reported, they send a screenshot. Oh, this was, and we got to respond to it all, right? And appreciate it, you know, so we know what's out there. But it's kind of like some of the stuff we'll read and I'm like, yeah, that's not coming from anyone associated with the Bowen family, or it's just a flat out lie, you know? And, you know, like, oh, he's going to flip to this, that, and the other. It's like, that's not even in the conversation. So I don't, you know, I think there's some coaches out there trying to sort of create some problems and get Notre Dame to overreact and say something to Peyton that's going to screw them over and then, you know, run back. But Notre Dame hasn't taken the bait on that. So Notre Dame has taken Peyton and his family at their word, which they should, until they have reason not to.
Sure.
And so, you know, to me, it's just a different scenario. And whether it's coaches down there at Geyer, whether it's family, whether it's Peyton himself, whether it's other commits, I mean, the theme has been the same all along, and it hasn't changed. If it starts to change, we'll let you know and we'll get worried. And it started to change with Keon, which is why our intel over the last week with Keon has changed. But I mean, a month ago, I'd have said I'm more worried about Peyton than I am Keon.
100%.
Flat out. Over the last week and a half, that's changed.
Brian, let's be a little transparent about one part of this. To your point, we talked on the phone like a week ago, and I was like, wow, is it like I feel a lot better about Peyton Bowen now than I do about Keon Keeley. Like it flipped. It went complete 180 on us in a very short amount of time. So to your point, and I will also have a lot to say about some folks around the country if Jeremiah Love does end up at Notre Dame, by the way.
Oh, yes.
That is another player where I know for a fact there's been some things that have been out there that just are not at all true.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And like I said, we have more of an intel up on where the latest with Love and Bowen on the message board, but I did want to kind of get some of that stuff out there because it's been interesting. It's been very interesting to see the direction that things have gone, especially since one of those new recruiting outlets has kind of come along. So yeah, we'll see how all this goes. But I'm gonna sit back and kind of relax and let things play out, and then I'll probably just come out one of these days just throwing just bombs. So I don't know when that day is going to come, but it's going to come. There's no doubt. It's going to come either way, but when it comes is going to be determined by how events transpire.
Yes.
There's no doubt. Brent Smith says, I'm really concerned about the Patterson injury. The trio interior of Lug, Correll, and Kristovic makes me a little uncomfortable. I think that's fair.
That's fair. Yeah.
I think it's fair. I mean, look, I think there's potential there. but there's a lot to prove there. Look, guys, this is where we're at now, right? It's August 18th. I mean, this is where I was as a coach every time in the middle of August. Hey, I feel good about it, but they got to show it to me. I don't really know until we get to, and at the Division III and the 1AA level is a little different because we would have scrimmages. We could scrimmage people, so you kind of get a little bit of a taste against somebody else. But even then, it's like, okay, we don't really know. They got to show it, right? What version of Josh Lugger are we going to get? What version of Zeke Crow? Are we going to get the guy from 2 years ago? Maybe a more experienced version of that. If so, I'm good about center. I feel good. Are we going to get the same version of Andrew Kristoff from last year? Is it going to be a little worse, a little better? I don't know. So, Brent, I think that's fair. I mean, look, with Jarrett Patterson, the floor, right? I think the thing with him is he's been really up and down, but he's never been bad. He's always been at least solid. And then sometimes he's really good. That's not true of the other guys. They have some moments where they're like, that guy's not good, in this game.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's a legitimate concern. I'm here's why I'm more optimistic, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
It's because they're all older now. They're seniors or sixth-year seniors. And the other one is Harry Heastan and Chris Watt. I mean, I know that may seem like a cop-out, but, I mean, track records are what they are. And there have been interiors that don't have the three-man talent of this that Harry Heastan has turned into pretty decent offensive lines, if we're being honest.
Yeah. I mean, I said I would give Harry Heastan the benefit of the doubt because of the track record he has. There's no doubt. But Brent, again, like Brian just said it, but I would just reiterate again, you're completely fair and feeling the way that you do about this, right? Because Josh Lugg didn't play guard last year. He's changing positions again. Zeke Correll, last time we saw him, was not very good.
Right.
And Andrew Kristofic was solid but unspectacular. Like that's what you're working with that trio. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt with Coach Heastan effects on them, because I think that there is a lot more talent than what has been fully on display in recent years with all three of those players.
Yep. I got a question from Tyler Hanley. You have said Botelho has had problems not on the field or because of himself. Has he been able to figure that out, and has he been constant in that regard? So I don't know the answer to that, Tyler. What I can say, however, it's been a long time since anyone has raised a red flag to me about his conduct in any way.
And no news is good news.
In this instance, 1,000% correct. 1,000% correct. I mean, that's exactly like, hey, you want to hear nothing. That you want to hear nothing. Like, hey, what have you heard about Jordan Botelho? Nothing. Whew. All right, that's good. Thank gosh. Because look, there's never, ever been a doubt about Jordan Botelho's talent. It's about, can you count on him? Can you depend on him? And everything you're hearing them mention his name. Here's the other thing you notice. You're hearing the coaches mention his name more. And when the coaches mention a kid's name more, it's because there's an inherent trust being built there. And that's something Jordan has to earn. And if he is playing, it's because he earned it. And that's a positive. And that's a good thing. And it shows that he's grown up. Because look, if I could tell you all everything I did as an 18 to 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I'd be pretty embarrassed, to be honest with you. I'd be pretty embarrassed. And fortunately, it didn't, get me in too much trouble, but I'd be pretty embarrassed. And so we all hopefully grow up.
I was perfect at those ages.
Sure. I've talked to your dad. Totally know that's true. Yeah. You forget I know your dad. So true. I can find that out in a heartbeat. Yeah. All right. Timeout Tom. So more of a comment than a question, which I like. He goes, Notre Dame has to get a chip on their shoulder and become less of a nice guy. Tongue in cheek, to change Notre Dame's image on September 3rd, Notre Dame should wear flat black uniforms, helmets, shoes, and socks. I mean, he said tongue in cheek, but honestly, Ryan, Tom nailed it. Timeout Tom nailed it.
Yeah.
And like, you go back and watch the Notre Dame games, and I've told you that I've been watching Notre Dame games from the 88 to 93 I always kind of do just to remind myself of what Notre Dame should be. Sometimes I'll go back and watch games from 17 and, during that stretch of really good football. And the reality is, Tom, is one of the things we've criticized Notre Dame for in recent years is they're not a real physical football team as a whole. Their offensive line was in 2020 to a degree, but they just, like last year, they were not a physical football team anywhere. They had really good players, but they weren't physical. Like, Notre Dame, the way it used to be, like Sean Davis and I were talking about this the other day, like in a conversation, like, you hated playing Notre Dame, Brian, because, and I wish you could have lived during the 88 to 93 period, but go back and watch some YouTube games. You may beat Notre Dame, But like it was one of those ones where like, you get into a fight, you may win that fight, but you're walking away bloodied, bruised, and broken.
Yeah.
And that's how it was playing Notre Dame. Is you were going to battle them, you were going to fight them, you were going to scrap and claw, and you were going to you might walk away with a victory, but I assure you, you're walking away with a limp. Figuratively speaking, kind of thing. And that's where Notre Dame has to get back to. I mean, if Notre Dame is going to be the team they're capable of being, look, 88 team had plenty of speed. I wrote about this. Has Notre Dame had a more dynamic trio of athletes on the same team than Tony Rice, Ricky Waters, and Rocket Ismail like they had in 1989? I don't think so. They had speed and explosiveness. They were so loaded at running back in 88 that Ricky Waters started a wide receiver. You know what I mean? Like a guy that was a 10,000-yard rusher in the National Football League couldn't become a running back in Notre Dame until his third year. That's how loaded they were. But what truly made those teams was they were going to fight you, and it wasn't just that they were physical; it was a mentality of, like we played that video for you on Saturday with Lou Holtz. Let me see you disrespect me now that now that we're nose on nose, now that my face is to you. I was like, that's not how you want to be. You don't want that. You don't want that smoke. That's the new expression. You don't want that smoke, and that's how it was. Where like I'm watching the BC game from '92, Ryan.
Yep.
And it's just like, coming to that game, like I think BC, I'm actually gonna pull it up now. I think BC was like number 2 in the country, or number 7 in the country, number 9. They were number 9 in the country coming into that game. They had beaten Penn State that year. They were a really good football team, and they had smoked a lot of teams, beat Michigan State by 2 touchdowns, smoked Northwestern, who wasn't that good. I mean, that was a highly ranked BC team at that time that year, number 9 team. And by the middle of the first quarter, BCU was basically a team full of Rasheem Greens. I mean, they just wanted no part of what Notre Dame was doing to them physically. Just wanted no part of it. And the thing is, they knew it coming into the game. So the first time they got punched, it was like, okay, I knew this was going to happen. And then, now kudos to them for bouncing back that next year, not having that same fear. But like that was the reputation Notre Dame had was, and that made them say, you know what's coming next year. Right. So you better be ready for it. And they were able to do that. But, like BC didn't play Notre Dame before that. I mean, so like that 1992 game, I mean, it had been a while since they had played. Actually, let me pull this up here. It had been a minute since they played. I'm trying to pull up this. Have you ever gone to Winsipedia? It's a great resource. Yeah. So when they played from 92, they hadn't played since 1987. So that was like a 5-year stretch. So 87 was right before Notre Dame became Notre Dame in the Lou Holtz era. I mean, they were good that year. They went 8-3. I think they were 8-0 at one point in time, but they weren't quite that team. By 92, they were the biggest, baddest, like most physical team in college football. They weren't the best, but they were the biggest and baddest. And BC was not ready for that. And it helped them next year, but they weren't ready for that. And that's just kind of how it was with Notre Dame back then. And I want them to get back to that. Now, speed has to be there, but I want to see them get back to that. There's no doubt. See here, Ed says not even capping when I say this. I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Like messing around, joking.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, whatever that means. There could be a 3-star floating around right now who will turn out to be better than Keon Keeley. Just the truth. He's right. I mean, I don't know who that is, and I'm not betting on it, but that's a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, we see this all the time. Like there was a comment made on our message board by someone who's one of our better posters. Love this guy as a poster, but he made a comment like, kind of here's the issues with the class. And there are some. This class needs a quarterback, right? I mean, they do. They need. There's other needs in this class. It's not a complete class yet. It's not full yet. And and he said they don't have an edge rusher that is like Aiden Hutchinson. So okay, that's fair. They don't have that guy. But you're only assuming that based on looking at the recruiting rankings, because I don't know who would have thought that about Aiden Hutchinson when he was in high school. Who when he was coming out of high school thought he was going to become what he was last year? No, nobody did. I mean, his ranking he was ranked 88th by 24/7 Sports, 129th by Rivals, and 193rd by ESPN. Looks a lot like the ranking for Brendan Vernon and Boubacar Traore.
Sure does.
So you're correct, Ed. I mean, we don't know. We don't know if Keon's going to be as good as we think he will be. I'd be willing to bet on that one. I think Keon's going to be an excellent player.
Agreed.
I honestly, here's my concern for him. I don't know if he can be as good at Bama as he would have been at Notre Dame because I don't think he fits there. I don't. I don't think he fits at
You mean
Alabama.
scheme wise?
No, as a
Or
person.
as a person? Got it. Got it.
As a person and scheme wise, there's something to that. Are they going to
Yeah.
make him, Will Anderson, or are they going to make him the other end? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, how are they going to build around him? I'm not
Yeah.
a huge fan of, to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of their defensive coaching staff. I've said this before. Alabama's coaching staff on defense underwhelms me and has since Pete Golding got there. Just
Mhm.
has. I mean, they get by on talent. They're not a well-coached football team on defense right now. They're just not. I mean, I'm sorry. When they dominate on defense, it's because their dudes are just way better than your dudes.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to disagree with that, Ryan? Feel free to do so, but I'm not impressed with Pete Golding.
No.
And their defensive line aren't as well coached as they used to be. I believe it's the same guy that's been there for a while, correct?
I'm not sure about
I
that.
could be wrong on
Maybe.
that, but I'm not impressed by it, to be honest with you. And I just think Keon as a young man is like I said, he's a good kid. He's a Notre Dame type of kid. And I don't know how well he's going to fit at Alabama. I really don't.
Well,
he's a kid from a really good academic private school and high school and all that kind of stuff. For him, I'm concerned about the fit. I really am.
That's fair. I think for Ed's question, Brian, a quick exercise that we could do is tell me who you think are potentially the three best defensive players in Notre Dame in 2022.
Three best Notre Dame players in 2022.
Defensively.
Defensively, I mean, for me, it would be it's best on each level. How about
Yeah, let's go best on each. Wait, no. That wasn't where I was going to go with it. But
okay,
if you
I
want to
mean,
do it
three
that way,
best is debatable, but let's just say Foskey,
yes.
Brandon Joseph, and either Cam Hart or Jason Adamiola.
That's where I was going to go to the point of you already mentioned Isaiah Foskey wasn't ranked as a top 200.
It's a 4-star, but not a top 200.
Top 200, right? Brandon Joseph was a 3-star. I know that composite, like everybody across the board thought he was a 3-star. And Cam Hart was a 3-star wide receiver coming out of high school. So to that point, yes, you can find the value there. That doesn't mean that they're not talented. It just means that there's probably a different road that they have to take to getting where they need to go.
Right. And Jason Adamiola was kind of in the middle. He was ranked 45th by 247 Sports, but 237 by ESPN, 169 by Rivals. Yep. Right.
And
so,
Brandon Joseph played in College Station in Texas.
Right.
And Texas A&M did not go after him.
Bet you they're regretting that one. I love Mike Elko, but that's a bit of a miss. No, I'm kind of joking about that because like Jesse Bates was from Fort Wayne. And Jesse Bates was not a Notre Dame caliber player coming out of high school.
That's fair.
I mean, we're saying that in good fun, but I will say this though. I did see Brandon Joseph's film. I watched that about a week or so ago, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know why this kid was ranked as the number. Like, I'm looking at ESPN and 247 Sports. They didn't even have him in the top 100 in the state of Texas. I'm sorry. Have you seen his high school?
Film?
Yeah, I mean, would I have been like, oh my God, I'm so glad Notre Dame got this guy. He's a future consensus All-American. No, he got longer, he filled out, and he got more explosive athletically. But he was you could see the instincts. You could see he was fluid. He made a lot of plays on the ball.
I know he was really productive in high school. I mean, last year I thought he almost had 100 tackles and 2 interceptions.
I mean, he's a good football player. I would have said he's not a super. You know what? Not quite to Adon Schuler's level, but I would have said a lot of things about him that I say about Adon. Maybe not the most explosive guy, but really smooth and fluid, really aggressive, gets his hands on a lot of footballs. Whereas Adon is more of a downhill. So like their style was different, but like the attributes I would have explained are the same. Smart, heady, covers a lot of ground, makes a lot of plays on the ball. Adon does that more as a run defender and jumping routes where Brandon, you could see even then. I mean, there's a play where he's playing center field. He baits the quarterback, jumps it, and just, picks it off. Well, gee, we've seen that before. Sure. But now I just think the athletic package is taking a jump. And honestly, sometimes that happens. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, how do some of these kids go? How does Ali Marpet go to Hobart? You know what I mean? Like, guys develop at different stages, but yeah. So I give Coach Elko a hard time for that. I have a great deal of respect for Mike Elko. It's just a little bit of a fun jab for him. Tyler Binge, we're getting close to wrapping up here. Tyler Binge, how did Saban win that first in 2009 in Clemson in 2016? They have developed their talent they had in the program that weren't necessarily 5 stars coming out of high school. Now, I will say one thing. Alabama did have the number 3 ranked class in the country coming into that year. So their freshman class was ranked very high. And their 2008 class was ranked very high. So they were starting to accumulate talent, but that's kind of similar to where Notre Dame is. And Sean Davis and I have talked about this. They had the number 6 class in the country last year. Notre Dame did. And this year, I still believe they're going to finish with a top 5 class. Is it quite the top 3 that Bama had in 8 and 9? No, but it's definitely better than what it's been. But one of Bama's classes was coming into that was ranked like 16th. So, so to your point, we talked about this last week, Ryan, and Alabama had some stars on that 2009 championship team. Now, but not all those stars were necessarily stars coming out of high school.
Sure.
So Alabama's recruiting classes back then were ranked, I think like 16th one year, and let me see if I can find some of these rankings. I have to go to Rivals for it, but they were not top 10 classes until 08. But they had some stars. They had Rolando McClain. They had Mark Ingram, who was not a top 100 player coming out of high school. They had Julio Jones, who was a sophomore on that 09 team. He was a 5-star guy. Mark Barron was a top 100 guy who was a highly ranked guy. Like, they had some guys. But some of their other stars, like Kareem Jackson, was a 3-star recruit who I believe – I get him and Javier Arenas confused. One of them, I believe the runner-up was Bowling Green, and the other one, the runner-up was Florida International. Wow. They were 3-star recruits. They're starting 3-4 edge players were Eric Anders, who was a 2-star, and Corey Reamer, who was a 3-star, right? And so they were mixed in with Rolando McClain and Mark Barron. To your point, their quarterback, Greg McElroy, not a big-time recruit, right? So – there were some big time players, but to Tyler's point, they Nick Saban identified some guys. And remember the year before, Ryan, they lost their best player from the year before. Andre Smith went to the NFL.
Oh yeah, right tackle.
And he was a top draft pick. So, it's one of those things where Clemson we've talked about a lot, where Clemson built up their run on the backs of some good but not elite recruiting classes, elite from a ranking standpoint, but they were getting good players that fit, and they developed, and they had a big-time quarterback. Yes. That's the difference. Alabama was able to win without big-time quarterbacks because they recruited so much elite talent. Clemson recruited really good talent, some elite, but really good talent, but they had an elite quarterback. And Notre Dame has to follow a little bit of a blend of both, I think. I think Notre Dame's recruiting peak can be better than Clemson's during their buildup. I do believe that. Will it be what Bama's was? No, it won't. But if you can still develop those type of players, then you're gonna have some success. Because as I talked about, like Alabama lost some dudes. They lost Andre Smith and Antoine Caldwell off that team. They lost Glenn Coffey, who was their leading running back. They lost Rashad Johnson off that team.
I forgot about Glenn Coffey, man.
Yeah.
He was a tough runner.
Yeah.
He's a tough kid.
And they went out the next year and won a title after getting their brains beat in by Utah in the Sugar Bowl. They went out the next year and ran the table and were one of his better teams, even though the talent wasn't there. That's what Notre Dame has to do. But that's going to require Tyler Buckner to be what we hope he can be, and it's going to require CJ Carr to be what we hope he can be, because they're not going to be able to match talent for talent at every single position as Bama. They have to have a couple positions where they out-recruit Bama at offensive line, quarterback, places like that. And then the development has to be top-notch. And that's why every day you say, boy, am I glad that Bob Diaco called Brian Kelly and said, you have to hire Matt Balis. Because had Bob Diaco not done that, I don't know if we're in the same conversation. I don't know if we're in the same conversation. So I think that's a great place to end this show. So I want to thank everybody. Make sure you're checking out irishbreakdown.com today, because we are going to have some updates. Sean Stiers, I'm actually, as soon as I finish this, I'm going to edit and publish a story that Sean sent me. He's got an injury update. There was a lot of injury conversation from Coach Freeman today, just updating where everybody is. So I'll have that up here in the next 10 minutes or so at irishbreakdown.com. And I'll obviously publish it on our message board, and I'll tweet it out at Coach D178. So you'll see it at both. I also will have it on our Facebook page, which we haven't really let any new customers in because we're trying to weed out some stuff first before we add new people in. There's so much spam on Facebook. It's unreal. It's even more than we get in our chat here, to be honest with you. So we have to be careful with that. Just want to make sure that everybody says that. Check out the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Everybody that joins, the vast majority of people that join know what it's about, and it's a great place to have some conversation. And as long as you show each other respect, it's good. We'll be passionate and disagree and all that other kind of stuff. So definitely make sure you check that out. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. And as Ryan said, the sun will come out tomorrow. Notre Dame is going to be just fine. Players have to make a decision. Do you want to be on the ground floor of something special, or do you want to go somewhere else and just be the next whoever? There's going to be a lot of kids that want to be on the ground floor of something special, and that's why this thing is rolling in a great direction, and why we're still excited, even though we're super bummed about Keon as a player and as a young man. Great kid, but Notre Dame's going to be okay. And that's end of the day. That's where we're going to leave it. So thanks for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow or tonight. Sean Stiers and they're going to talk about the Manti Te'o documentary tonight on Irish Breakdown, IB Sports Nation at 6:00.
I watched that last night. I
haven't watched it yet. Ryan asked me. I said it was really good. Sean really liked it. They're going to talk a lot. They're going to get some updates from the practice. Sean was at the practice today for the first 5 periods. He was at Coach Freeman's press conference today. He'll talk about that a little bit, but they're going to really talk a lot about the Manti Te'o situation. And Sean and I were talking about on the phone, and it really is heartbreaking that Manti is not known right now for being the most decorated linebacker in college football history. Nobody talks about that when Manti's name comes up. Like, he should be a guy that Notre Dame is trotting out every other day to as a rep. But unfortunately, because of that whole situation, it just doesn't turn out that way, unfortunately. But hopefully this is a step from what you've told me, from what Sean told me. Hopefully this is a step in sort of rehabilitating his image, because he was a phenomenal player, just a phenomenal player. And I'm glad that he's getting his chance to tell his story. So I love to hear that. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day. 6:00 tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk, talking about Manti Te'o, latest with Notre Dame. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll do some mailbag stuff. Ryan and I may do an impromptu show tomorrow night, not recruiting related, but more related to some of the stuff we got to get caught up on. We'll have a show on Saturday. Lots going on. So stay locked in to the Irish Breakdown podcast.